Life, for Sker, was a tapestry woven from the humid breath of cycads and the distant, territorial calls of colossal beasts. Every shadow held potential, every rustle, a story. The young Troodon, quick and cunning, knew the vibrant forest as intimately as its own pulse. A world teeming with the urgent beat of life, a relentless hunt for survival under a benevolent azure sky. Then, the sky bled. Not in crimson, but in a blinding, searing white that erased the sun. A sound like the tearing of the firmament swallowed all other noise. A primal shriek that vibrated through bone and earth. The benevolent sky turned to ash, then to an impenetrable, choking shroud. The very ground convulsed, vomiting fire and shadow. In that instant, Sker was no longer a hunter, no longer part of a pack. It was a singular, terrified flicker of life in a world consumed, a world that collapsed into an abyss of fire and ice, leaving behind only the cold, silent truth of oblivion. The whispering forest. Life, for Sker, was a tapestry woven from the humid breath of cycads and the distant territorial calls of colossal beasts. Every shadow held potential, every rustle a story. The young Troodon, quick and cunning, knew the vibrant forest as intimately as its own pulse. A world teeming with the urgent beat of life, a relentless hunt for survival under a benevolent azure sky. The dawn, even filtered through the colossal fronds of tree ferns and the towering trunks of Araucaria, brought with it a palpable humidity, a thick living breath that smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet cloying scent of prehistoric blooms. Sker stirred, its large obsidian eyes still clouded with the remnants of slumber, blinking open to the dappled light of the late Cretaceous morning. Its perch on a low moss-covered branch offered a vantage point, not high enough to be seen by the towering sauropods that occasionally rumbled through the undergrowth, but sufficient to survey its immediate territory. A ripple of sound, barely audible, traveled up its sensitive forelimb from the branch, the scurry of tiny lizard-like creatures in the bark below. Sker's head cocked, its neck an elegant curve of lean muscle and fine proto-feathers. Its ears, keen and precise, swiveled independently, catching the faint buzz of oversized dragonflies, and the distant, sonorous bellow of a passing Triceratops herd. A sound that vibrated through the very air. Sker was not just hearing, it was listening, interpreting the symphony of its world. A living database of warnings, opportunities, and the ever-present hum of life. It was slender for a Troodon of its age, perhaps 5 seasons old, but what it lacked in raw bulk it more than compensated for, with an almost unnerving intelligence. Its brain case, even by Troodon standards, was slightly more pronounced, housing a mind that processed information with a speed and clarity that set it apart, even from its own pack. Where others might react, Sker often anticipated. Where others might charge, Sker calculated. This morning, that keen intellect was already sifting through the layers of sensory data, piecing together the day's narrative before it had truly begun. A low, resonant chirp cut through the pre-dawn quiet, a call Sker knew intimately. It was Tana, the pack matriarch, her voice carrying the undeniable authority of experience and strength. Sker responded with a series of quick, clicking vocalizations, its throat pouch inflating slightly, acknowledging the summons. Dropping with fluid grace from the branch, it landed silently on the carpet of fallen leaves and ferns. Its 3-toed feet, armed with wicked, retractable sickle claws, barely disturbing the soil. Its tail, long and feathered, acted as a perfect counterbalance as it moved with a silent, flowing gait through the dense vegetation. The pack, a loose confederation of 7 adults and 4 subadults, was gathering near the trickling stream that snaked through their territory. Tana, her scales, a rich, earthy green, mottled with streaks of dark moss, was the undeniable leader. Her eyes, scarred from countless skirmishes, held a depth of ancient wisdom. Beside her stood Kor, a younger male, all raw power and impatient energy, a foil to Tana's measured calm. Kur's two siblings, Ren and Jira, were already there, preening their feathers, their movements less economical, more youthful than Skur's. "The air is heavy," Tana clicked, her head tilted towards the east, where the sky was just beginning to lighten from bruised purple to bruised pink. "The scent of fear carries on the wind." Kor let out a low rumble, a sound of anticipation. "Pray?" "Always pray, young one," Tana retorted, a hint of ancient amusement in her voice. "But what kind of fear? The kind that breaks branches and sends dust spiraling, or the kind that shivers through the undergrowth, silent and quick?" Gyr approached, its steps so light it seemed to float. It offered a respectful trill to Tana, then turned its gaze to the north, its nostrils flaring. It picked up a faint, metallic tang on the breeze, something that wasn't decaying flora or the musk of distant herbivores. It was the sharp, acrid scent of nervous sweat, layered beneath the familiar smell of a juvenile Maiasaura. A young one, perhaps newly separated from its herd, vulnerable. "Alone," Skur communicated, a series of rapid, almost imperceptible flicks of its tongue and a subtle shift in the angle of its head. "And young, heading towards the red rock thicket, lost." Tana's gaze sharpened, fixing on Skur. There was no need for spoken words, not in the way humans spoke. Their communication was a complex symphony of chirps, clicks, whistles, tail movements, feather displays, and subtle shifts in scent. Skur's assessment was always valued, often more so than Kor's bluster. Tana saw the deeper currents that flowed beneath Skur's calm exterior, the quiet observational power that made it a formidable hunter, despite its less imposing stature. "The red rock thicket," Tana confirmed, her voice a low purr of satisfaction. It was a labyrinth of crumbling, iron-rich rock formations, overgrown with thorny vines and spiky ferns, a natural ambush site. "Kor, Ren, with me. Jira, you flank wide to the west. Skur, you take the high ground. Spot the escape routes. Drive it towards the cleft." The pack fanned out, moving with practiced stealth. Skur ascended a series of rocky outcrops, using its agile forelimbs and prehensile feet to grip the rough surfaces. From its elevated position, it could see the top of the dense canopy, stretching out like an endless emerald sea, dotted with the crimson splashes of flowering vine. Below, the forest floor was a mosaic of shadow and light, a perfect camouflage for the pack's dark, feathered forms. The Maiasaura juvenile was exactly where Skur had predicted. It was a clumsy, gangly creature, its hide a pale, dusty green, its eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. It was nibbling nervously at the low-hanging leaves of a cycad, occasionally letting out a plaintive, honking cry, a sound that would be instantly recognized by its herd. But no answer came. It was truly alone. Skur observed its target with a cold, professional detachment. It noted the subtle shifts in the Maiasaura's weight, the way its head dipped when it reached for a particularly succulent leaf, the telltale twitch of its tail indicating a moment of relaxation. Skur's mind was a map, marking the potential paths of flight, the dense thickets where it might try to hide, the narrow ravines where it could be cornered. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing whistle echoed through the thicket, Tana's signal. The trap was sprung. Kor burst from the undergrowth, a flash of scaled muscle, roaring, his sickle claws extended. The Maiasaura shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, and bolted. It lumbered forward, surprising in its speed, crashing through the ferns towards the path of least resistance, precisely where Tana had predicted. Ren, a blur of motion, cut off its initial escape, driving it back, herding it further into the narrow winding paths of the redrock thicket. The juvenile Omaiasaura, blinded by panic, plunged deeper into the maze of rocks and thorny vine. Its honking cries became more desperate, echoing off the stone walls. It stumbled, regained its footing, and pushed onward, its flanks heaving. Grr, silent and unseen on its elevated perch, was not merely an observer. It was the pack's eyes and its strategic mind. It watched the Omaiasaura's desperate attempts to find an exit, saw the exact moment it would choose to pivot, to veer right instead of left, to attempt to squeeze through a crevice it was too large for. As the Omaiasaura lunged for what it thought was an escape route, a narrow gap between two colossal boulders, Skrr issued a series of quick, sharp clicks. The sound, almost imperceptible to the panicked herbivore, was a precise instruction to Jira, who was waiting, camouflaged, on the opposite side of the gap. Jira, anticipating the signal, sprang out with a guttural growl, blocking the Omaiasaurus' path. The juvenile, now thoroughly disoriented and trapped, spun around, its head crest lowered, a futile attempt to defend itself. Tana and Kor, emerging from the shadows, moved in for the final strike, their movements coordinated, efficient. Skrr watched the final moments, the desperate, futile struggle of the Omaiasaura, the swift, decisive movements of its pack members. There was no malice in it, only the cold, hard reality of the hunt, the ancient dance of predator and prey. Life sustained itself on life. It was the way of their world, a brutal, beautiful balance. After the kill, the pack gathered, feeding in a rough circle, their calls softer now, almost contented. The air, which had been thick with the scent of fear, was now pungent with fresh blood and the rich, earthy smell of the kill. Skrr ate deliberately, its sharp, serrated teeth tearing flesh from bone, its large eyes still scanning the periphery, ever vigilant. Even in moments of satiation, the world demanded awareness. Later, stretched out on a sun-warmed slab of rock, its belly full, Skrr watched the sky. The benevolent, azure sky, vast and endless, stretched above the canopy, a canvas of soft blues and wisps of white cloud. A flock of graceful pterosaurs, their wings like stretched leather sails, drifted lazily on the thermals, tiny specks against the immense dome. The sounds of the forest were beginning to soften as the afternoon deepened. The distant croak of a large amphibian, the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a light breeze, the chirps of insects warming in the sun. Skrr often found itself staring at the sky. Unlike its pack members, who seemed to view it as simply a backdrop to their immediate world of trees and earth, Skrr sometimes felt a strange, inexplicable pull towards its vastness. It was a space so immense, so unknowable, that it stirred a nascent curiosity deep within its reptilian brain. What lay beyond the clouds? What moved through those unfathomable depths? The thought was fleeting, a spark of abstract contemplation that quickly faded back into the urgent, tangible reality of the forest. Survival demanded focus on the here and now, on the tangible threats and opportunities that stalked the humid earth. The gentle warmth of the sun seeped into Skrr's scales, and for a fleeting moment, a sense of deep, primal contentment settled over it. This was its world, vibrant, dangerous, demanding, but endlessly rich. The pack was strong, the hunting grounds fertile. Life was a relentless hunt for survival, yes, but it was also a joyous, urgent beat, a constant renewal under that vast blue expanse. Then the sky bled, not in crimson, but in a blinding, searing white that erased the sun. A sound like the tearing of the firmament swallowed all other noise, a primal shriek that vibrated through bone and earth. The malevolent sky turned to ash, then to an impenetrable, choking shroud. The very ground convulsed, vomiting fire and shadow. In that instant, Skur was no longer a hunter, no longer part of a pack. It was a singular, terrified flicker of life in a world consumed, a world that collapsed into an abyss of fire and ice, leaving behind only the cold, silent truth of oblivion. Shadows in the sky. Life for Skur was a tapestry woven from the humid breath of cycads and the distant territorial calls of colossal beasts. Every shadow held potential, every rustle a story. The young Troodon, quick and cunning, knew the vibrant forest as intimately as its own pulse, a world teeming with the urgent beat of life, a relentless hunt for survival under a benevolent, azure sky. His scales, a muted blend of forest greens and dappled browns, seemed to shimmer with the very light filtering through the towering Yarakaria and Jinkgoa. He moved with a dancer's grace, his long, slender legs propelled by powerful thighs, his three-toed feet barely disturbing the damp leaf litter. His large, intelligent eyes, a startling amber, scanned the undergrowth, absorbing every flicker of movement, every shifting pattern of light and shadow. The air, thick with the scent of decaying vegetation, damp earth, and the faint musky tang of a nearby hadrosaur herd, was a complex symphony to his flared nostrils. He was a creature of instincts honed over millennia, a predator whose survival hinged on an intricate understanding of his world. His pack, a tightly knit unit of a dozen individuals, moved with a similar, silent precision. They were masters of the crepuscular hours, their hunts often beginning as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in fiery hues, and ending as the first stars pricked through the deepening blue. Tonight, however, the twilight felt different. It began subtly, a faint distortion in the usual perfection of the evening sky. Skur crouched low beside his elder, Keel, watching a trio of Athelosaurus browse nervously at the edge of a fern glade, felt it first. The setting sun, usually a vibrant orange disk, seemed strangely muted, its light diffusing into an unnaturally pale apricot that bled into the distant horizon. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer pulsed in the upper atmosphere, as if the air itself had developed a fever. It wasn't a cloud, not smoke, but a translucent veil that subtly dulled the world's vivid palette. Keel, a scarred veteran whose wisdom was etched into every furrow of his snout, tilted his head, his own amber eyes narrowing. A low, almost inaudible chuff vibrated in his throat, a sound Skur recognized as curiosity mixed with a nascent unease. The Athelosaurus, usually so absorbed in their feeding, raised their heads in unison, their large eyes fixed on the strange sky. One let out a high-pitched, reedy cry, not of alarm, but of bewildered distress, and then nudged its companion, urging it deeper into the concealing foliage. The pack, attuned to every shift in the world around them, had noticed it too. Their low clicks and chirps, usually a constant, almost playful chatter during a hunt, had dwindled to an anxious silence. They were watchful, their bodies tensed, not with the anticipation of a pounce, but with an unfamiliar apprehension. The strange light persisted for days. Mornings dawned not with the usual crisp, clean light, but with a hazy, almost sickly yellow that bled into an unnatural green-tinged blue by midday. The shadows, usually so defined, seemed softer, less distinct, as if the world itself was being viewed through a veil of dust that wasn't there. Skur found himself shaking his head instinctively, trying to clear his vision. But the distortion was external, not within his sharp sight. Then came the sounds. A deep, resonant hum, barely audible at first, seemed to thrum beneath the earth, vibrating through the soles of Skur's feet, even when he stood still. It was like the distant, continuous roar of some colossal, unknown beast, felt rather than heard, a low bass note in the world's symphony that had never been there before. He often pressed his belly to the ground, trying to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration in the very bones of the planet. The pack, too, frequently stopped, their heads cocked, nostrils flaring, trying to scent out the source of the unsettling tremor. Their sleep became fitful, punctuated by restless turning and low, disquieted whines. The most unsettling sign, however, was the migration. It began with the smaller herbivores, the skittish Hypsilophodon, and the agile ornithomimice. They were usually creatures of habit, following established paths to watering holes and preferred foraging grounds. But now, they streamed through the forest, a silent, frantic river of scales and feathers, moving with an urgency that spoke of an unseen terror. They didn't flee from predators. They fled from something else, something vast and unseen, pushing them relentlessly west, towards the towering, distant mountains. Skur watched from a high perch in a Gaisquoium as a herd of triceratops, usually unyielding in their territoriality, lumbered past, their massive bodies radiating an uncharacteristic anxiety. Their deep bellows, typically used for dominance or warning, were now laced with a plaintive, almost mournful quality. Their calves, usually tucked safely in the center of the herd, stumbled and cried, their mothers nudging them forward with an almost desperate urgency. These were not the usual seasonal movements. This was a mass exodus, a frantic retreat from an unknown looming threat. The predators, too, were affected. The smaller dromaeosaurs, usually fierce rivals for territory, were seen sharing hunting grounds with an uncomfortable truce, their usual aggression replaced by a wary vigil. Even the great Tyrannosaurus rexel, the undisputed apex of this ecosystem, seemed disturbed. Skur, on a scouting mission for the pack, once observed a lone MTT, Rexy, a magnificent, battle-scarred male known for his unwavering confidence, standing motionless at the edge of a clearing. His massive head was lifted, his black eyes scanning the sky, his deep rumbling growl a constant low thrum against the backdrop of the migrating herd. He wasn't hunting. He was listening, his primordial senses straining to comprehend the shift in the very fabric of his world. The pack's hunts grew difficult. Their usual prey was gone, scattered by the unseen force. They had to range further, venturing into territories they usually avoided, crossing paths with larger, more dangerous carnivores who were equally desperate. Skur felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach more acutely than ever before. But more than hunger, he felt a deeper, more profound emptiness, the absence of the familiar, the unsettling feeling that the world he knew was subtly, irrevocably coming apart. The atmospheric anomalies escalated. The air became heavy, charged, almost metallic on the tongue. Static electricity, unseen but felt, made the fine hairs along Skur's spine prickle. The sky, especially at dawn and dusk, began to bleed unnatural hues. Not the soft oranges and purples of a normal sunset, but angry reds that dripped into bruised purples, sickly greens, and finally a deep, oppressive charcoal that seemed to absorb all light. Dust motes, finer than any volcanic ash Skur had ever known, began to hang in the air, catching the strange light and swirling in phantom eddies, as if the very air was beginning to tear itself apart. One evening, as the pack huddled beneath the sheltering fronds of a massive tree fern, a new phenomenon presented itself. The ground beneath them began to tremble, not with the familiar rhythmic thud of a passing sauropod, but with a deep, undulating shudder. It was erratic, like a vast, unseen creature stirring beneath the crust of the earth. Leaves rustled violently, even though there was no wind. Small stones skittered down slopes, dislodged by the subterranean heaving. The low hum intensified, becoming a pervasive drone that resonated in Skur's bones, making his teeth ache. Heel, who had always exuded an aura of calm authority, began to pace restlessly, his claws scraping against the damp earth. His chirps were sharper now, less inquisitive, more urgent. He would frequently stop, raise his snout to the strange sky, and let out a guttural rumble that spoke of deep, ancient fear. The younger members of the pack, usually boisterous and playful, were quiet, huddled close, their large eyes reflecting the ominous glow of the horizon. Skur felt a tightness in his chest, a primal dread that transcended mere physical discomfort. His senses, usually his allies, were now screaming warnings he couldn't interpret, a cacophony of wrongness. Sleep became impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every distant tremor, every shift in the oppressive atmosphere sent jolts of adrenaline through his small body. He dreamed of vast empty spaces, of choking dust, and the crushing weight of silence. He would wake, heart hammering, to the sight of his packmates, equally restless, staring up at the perpetually bruised sky. The days blurred into a continuum of dread. The air grew hotter, unnaturally so, even at night. The rivers, usually clear and flowing, became sluggish, their surfaces covered in a strange iridescent film. The usually lush vegetation began to wilt, the vibrant greens fading to a sickly yellow, then a brittle brown. The world, once so robust and teeming, seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for an unseen blow. One final morning, the air was still, heavy, almost viscous. The hum was no longer subtle. It was a roaring vibration, a low-frequency bellow that vibrated through every living thing. The sky was an impossible color, a bruised, blood red at the horizon that deepened to an inky, suffocating black directly overhead. The dust motes now swirled like miniature cyclones, catching the lurid light. A faint, acrid smell, like burnt rock and ozone, began to permeate the air, stinging Skur's nostrils. The migrating herds were gone, vanished over the horizon. The forest was eerily silent, devoid of the usual chirps of insects, the calls of birds, the rustle of unseen creatures. Even the wind had died. Skur stood with his pack, huddled close in the strange pre-dawn twilight. Their scales were bristling, their eyes wide with incomprehension and pure, unadulterated terror. Heel let out a long, keening whine, a sound of utter despair. The ground beneath their feet began to thrum with a new, terrifying intensity, a deep, resonant rumble that shook their very teeth. Skur looked up, his amber eyes reflecting the impossible sky, a silent scream caught in his throat. Then, the sky bled. Not in crimson, but in a blinding, searing white that erased the sun. The world's fury. The air hung thick and humid over the lush coastal plains, a verdant tapestry woven with cycads and towering ferns. Skur, a young hypsilophodon, with scales the color of sun-baked mud and eyes like polished obsidian, twitched a nostril at the scent of distant rain. Its small herd, a tight-knit family unit, grazed contentedly in a clearing near the great inland sea, their soft chirps and rustles the only interruption to the symphony of cicadas and the distant cry of a pteranodon. Skur kept one wary eye on the dense canopy, where shadows often hid glinting teeth, but today, peace reigned. The sun, a benign disk in the pale blue sky, cast long, shifting shadows as the day matured. Life was a predictable rhythm of foraging, resting, and the comforting press of warm bodies against its own in the cool evenings. Then, the sky tore. It began not with a sound, but with a blinding flash, a white-hot spear of light that erupted above the horizon. So immense and sudden, it seared itself onto Skir's retina, even through its closed eyelids. A low, throbbing hum followed, deepening into a guttural growl that vibrated through the very bones of the earth. Skir, along with its siblings and parents, froze, their heads snapping upwards, their instincts screaming a warning they couldn't yet comprehend. The pteranodon cries turned to panicked shrieks, a frantic beating of wings as unseen birds scattered like wind-blown leaves. The hum intensified, rising to a monstrous roar, a sound that was not of the world, but from beyond it, a sound that was the rending of reality itself. A pressure wave hit, not like wind, but like a solid fist, slamming into Skir's small frame, knocking the breath from its lungs. Trees groaned and swayed, their branches whipping violently. Dust and leaves exploded upwards from the forest floor. Skir stumbled, its legs buckling, its heart a frantic drum against its ribs. Its mother, usually so calm, let out a guttural shriek of pure terror, pushing Skir forward with her snout. And then, the impact. It wasn't a sound that could be processed by ears. It was a cataclysmic thud, a percussion felt in the marrow that shook the world inside out. The ground beneath Skir's feet didn't just tremble. It bucked and convulsed like a dying beast. A seismic shock wave rippled outwards from the distant point of impact, tearing through the earth with unimaginable force. Skir was thrown off its feet, tumbling end over end as the world became a blur of green and brown. The air superheated instantly, a searing blast that felt like a furnace door flung open. A distant, invisible force ripped through the landscape, flattening everything in its path. Trees that had stood for centuries snapped like dry twigs, their trunks exploding into splinters. The very forest groaned in agony as it was scoured away. Skir landed hard, its body aching, a sharp pain in its left forelimb. It scrambled to its feet, limbs splayed, vision swimming. The sky was no longer pale blue. It was a churning, boiling cauldron of dark ash and incandescent fire. From the horizon, a wall of pure light, brighter than any sun, was unfurling, expanding with terrifying speed. This was not a storm. This was the sky igniting. The heat was instantaneous, oppressive, a physical presence that clawed at Skir's scales. The air shimmered, then began to burn. Trees, still upright, spontaneously combusted, their leaves curling into black ash, their bark erupting in orange flames. The world was catching fire. A wave of superheated gas swept over Skir, raising blisters on its exposed skin. The smell of ozone and searing vegetation filled its nostrils, overpowering all else. Panic, raw and unthinking, seized Skir. Its tiny brain, hardwired for flight, propelled it forward, away from the immediate blast, deeper into the forest, which was now transforming into a raging inferno. It ran, blindly, instinctively, weaving through the burning undergrowth. Every breath was a gasp of hot, ash-laden air that seared its throat. The ground continued to heave, making every step a desperate lurch. Trees crashed around it, their fiery limbs raining down like meteors. Skir glimpsed its family through the smoke and flames, its mother, its father, their familiar forms outlined against the hellish glow. They were scattered, each a desperate, struggling silhouette in the maelstrom. Skir called out, a high-pitched trill of fear and desperation, but its cry was swallowed by the roar of the firestorm, the unending shriek of the wind, and the continuous thunder of the collapsing world. One moment, they were there, a flickering promise of safety. The next, a flaming tree trunk, torn from its roots by an unseen force, crashed between Skir and its kin, an impassable wall of fire and debris. Meteor was alone, utterly, terribly alone. The firestorm intensified. It was not just the trees burning. The air itself seemed to be ablaze. Superheated rock fragments, ejected from the impact site, rained down from the sky, glowing like malevolent embers. Each impact sent up a shower of sparks, igniting patches of ground, creating new nuclei of destruction. Gur leaped over a flaming bush, its forelimbs screaming in protest. It could feel its scales blistering, the heat radiating through its body. It needed shelter, an impossible thought in a world being consumed by flame. It ran until its muscles screamed, until its lungs burned, until the very notion of running ceased to be a conscious thought and became a primal compulsion. The ground ahead began to slope downwards, hinting at a ravine or a gullet. Gur plunged into it, tumbling head over tail, desperate for any reprieve from the fiery onslaught. The sides of the gully were steep, offering a momentary shield from the direct heat and the falling debris. It lay panting, curled into a tight ball, its heart hammering. But the reprieve was fleeting. A new sound began to rumble, distinct from the firestorm. A low, persistent growl that vibrated up through the earth, growing steadily louder. It was coming from the direction of the sea. Gur lifted its head, eyes wide with incomprehension. The gully offered little in the way of visual cues, but the sound was unmistakable. The monstrous roar of water. The Chicxulub impact had not just ignited the land, it had convulsed the oceans. A tsunami, unfathomable in scale, was racing inland. The rumbling grew to a deafening crescendo, a sound that swallowed the firestorm, that dwarfed the thunder of the disintegrating world. Fear pushed itself up, scrambling up the side of the gully, its injured forelimb throbbing with every movement. What it saw stole the breath from its charred lungs. The horizon, where the great inland sea had always been, was gone. In its place was a towering wall of water, a monstrous, churning behemoth that blotted out the sky, rising higher than the tallest cicad. It was not blue, but a muddy, debris-choked brown, churned with the shattered remains of the coastline, uprooted trees, pulverized rocks, the indistinguishable detritus of a world ripped apart. The wave was moving with impossible speed, a liquid mountain thundering towards them, preceded by a violent wind that howled like 1,000 tormented spirits. Fear didn't hesitate. Survival, the only thought left in its mind, propelled it further inland, up the highest ground it could find. It scrambled over a fallen log, its claws scrabbling for purchase on the loose earth. The roar of the wave was now overwhelming, a physical force that vibrated through its very bones. Gur could feel the spray in the air, a cold, gritty mist that was instantly evaporated by the lingering heat. The wave struck the coastal plains with an explosive force that defied description. The ground shuddered as if struck by a giant's hammer. The gully Gur had just abandoned was swallowed instantly, a churning vortex of water and mud. Trees that had survived the initial impact were ripped from the earth like weeds, tossed skyward like confetti. Fear, on a slight rise of land, watched in horror as the leading edge of the tsunami surged past, a terrifying river of destruction. It was not a clean wave, but a torrent of chaos. Logs, boulders, and unidentifiable debris spun in its depths, each a potential killing blow. The sound of water meeting burning forest was a horrific hiss and steam, a primal battle of elements. The air grew heavy with moisture, even as the heat persisted. Gur was lashed by spray, chilled by the unexpected cold of the water, even as its scales felt as if they were baking. The wave passed, but its aftermath was equally terrifying. A turbulent, churning river now flowed where forest had once stood, sweeping everything before it. Gur was on an island of relative safety, but it was just that, relative. The water level continued to rise, pushing higher and higher, threatening to engulf even its small hillock. Then, as the water raged below, the sky above began its final, terrifying transformation. The fiery glow of the horizon, once a beacon of destruction, began to dim, not because the fires were dying, but because something else was obscuring them. Ash, soot, pulverized rock. A colossal plume of ejecta, blasted into the atmosphere from the impact site, was beginning to fall back to Earth. First, it was a fine, gray powder, settling on Skur's scales like an unnatural snow. Then, it thickened, a relentless downpour of fine particulate matter. The air grew murky, then dim, then unnaturally dark. The sun, which had been a distant, fiery red disk, faded into a smudged orange smear, then vanished entirely. The world plunged into an unnatural twilight, then a deeper, oppressive gloom. It was as if a colossal blanket had been thrown over the sky. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of sulfur and burning rock. The temperature plummeted. The intense heat of the initial firestorm gave way to a chilling cold that seemed to sink into Skur's bones. The fine ash became coarser, stinging its eyes, coating its tongue. Visibility dropped to mere paces. The roar of the water and the distant crackle of fire were the only sounds in this new, suffocating darkness. Skur stood shivering, alone on its precarious island. Its vision was useless. Its sense of smell was overwhelmed by the stench of desolation. Its hearing was dominated by the chaos. The world had gone from vibrant life to an unrecognizable hellscape in mere moments. The heat had burned it. The impact had thrown it. The tsunami had threatened to drown it. And now, the darkness was suffocating it. It stumbled forward, desperate for any form of shelter from the ash and the sudden, biting cold. Its injured leg ached with every step, but the primal urge to survive overrode the pain. It needed cover, a place where it could hide from the relentless ashfall, from the chilling winds that now whipped through the desolation, from the crushing weight of the new night. It moved by instinct, following the slight incline of the land, hoping for a rock overhang, a fissure in the earth, anything. It was a blind, fumbling search, its claws scrabbling on the ash-covered ground. The air grew colder still, the ash thicker. Each breath was a struggle, each step a perilous gamble in the suffocating black. And then, a faint shadow against the deeper blackness. A large, jagged outline that promised solidity. Skur pushed forward, stumbling, its chest heaving. It was a cluster of enormous uprooted boulders thrown together by the seismic convulsions, forming a crude, dark cave-like opening. Not a true cave, but a jumble of shattered stone, offering a sliver of protection from the relentless, falling sky. With a final burst of adrenaline, Skur squeezed through a narrow crevice between two enormous rocks, scraping its injured leg. It collapsed inside, the relatively calm air within the makeshift shelter, a blessed relief. It was cold, dark, and smelled of damp earth and shattered stone, but it was sheltery. The continuous hiss of falling ash, the low growl of the wind, and the distant, fading roar of the water were muffled, but still present. Skur curled into the tightest ball it could manage, pressing against the cold rock, every muscle screaming in protest. Its scales were coated in a fine layer of ash, its eyes burned, its throat was raw. It was alive. But for how long? The world outside was an undifferentiated blackness, a place of death and unimaginable cold. The long, terrifying night had truly begun. And Skur, a solitary speck in the vast broken world, was utterly, horribly alone. Beneath the ash veil, the rumble had passed. Days, perhaps. Or was it just hours? Skur, curled in a hollow beneath a granite overhang, had lost all measure of time. His world had shrunk to the rhythmic beat of his own panicked heart. The drip, drip, drip of water through fissures above, and the faint, persistent rasp of grit sifting down from some unseen opening. He had cowered there, deep in the ravine's shadowed embrace, as the sky had torn itself open, as the ground had writhed and shrieked. The light, once a vibrant, life-giving cascade, had first intensified to an unbearable, searing white, then vanished, leaving behind an oppressive, echoing blackness. The initial tremors had subsided, replaced by a low, continuous thrum that vibrated through the rock beneath his claws. The air, even in his sheltered nook, had grown frigid, biting at the sensitive skin of his muzzle, chilling him to the bone despite his scaly hide and fine, downy undergrowth. His stomach growled, a hollow ache that gnawed at his insides, a relentless reminder of the world he'd left behind, a world teeming with the scurrying, rustling, breathing things he hunted. He had waited for the sun to return, for the sounds of the forest to reassert themselves, for the familiar sense of damp earth and the blood-warm tang of fear. But only silence answered him, punctuated by the whisper of falling dust. His large obsidian eyes, accustomed to the dim twilight of the undergrowth, strained against the absolute void, picking out nothing. His sensitive auditory canals, usually twitching at the slightest rustle of a leaf or the distant call of prey, registered only the muffled, far-off groans of a world settling into a new, terrifying quietude. Finally, the primal urge to move, to ayano, overcame the instinct to hide. Gur uncurled slowly, his muscles stiff, joints creaking with disuse and cold. He was a creature built for swift, silent motion, for the thrill of the chase, but now every flex of his powerful hind legs felt like an immense effort. He stretched, extending his long tail to balance, his keen claws scraping against the rock floor. He could smell nothing but a faint, acrid tang, like burnt stone and something else, something metallic and alien. He picked his way cautiously through the debris-strewn floor of the ravine, his large eyes now almost useless, his reliance shifting to his keen sense of touch. His delicate, three-fingered hands, usually adept at manipulating small prey, now served as feelers, sweeping ahead to gauge the path. Jagged shards of rock, splintered branches, and something he didn't recognize, brittle, almost glassy, littered the passage. The air grew colder with every step he ascended, a cold that bit deep, radiating through his scales. He shivered, a rapid, involuntary trembling that spoke of a deep, systemic chill. The slope became steeper, the walls of the ravine drawing closer, almost touching above him. He could discern the faintest, almost imperceptible lessening of the gloom ahead. Was it an illusion? Hope, thin and fragile as a spider's silk, stirred within him. He dug his claws into the crumbling earth, pushing upward, his powerful legs burning with the effort. Loose scree shifted beneath him, threatening to send him sliding back into the depths, but his tail lashed, counterbalancing, his muscles straining. Higher he climbed, the cold intensifying until his breath plumed in faint, ghost-like wisps before his snout. The air grew thick, particulate. He could taste it now, a dry, chalky bitterness that coated his tongue and made his throat raw. It was ash, he realized, though unlike any ash he had ever encountered, not from a forest fire, not from a lightning strike. This was coarser, colder, seemingly endless. It permeated his nostrils, settled on his scales, turning his usually dark, iridescent hide to a mottled gray. He reached a lip, a final, treacherous ascent. Below him, the ravine was a pit of absolute darkness. Above there was a faint, diffuse glow, a strange, colorless light that was not the sun, not the moon, but merely a lessening of the infinite black. With a final surge of strength, he hauled himself over the edge, scrambling onto a plateau that had once been a familiar patch of woodland. What greeted him stole the breath from his lungs and froze the blood in his veins. The world was gone. not merely altered, but utterly annihilated. Where there had been towering, ancient cycads and ferns, now stood only splintered stumps, skeletal, fire-scorched remnants that clawed at the perpetually dark sky like petrified hands. The ground was no longer rich, loamy earth, but a vast, undulating expanse of pale gray ash, stretching to an obscured horizon. It lay thick and deep, muffling all sound, swallowing the very light. The sky itself was a bruised, sickly canvas of impenetrable dark gray. Not black, but a color that spoke of eternal twilight. No sun, no moon, no stars pierced its suffocating veil. Instead, a continuous silent rain of fine ash drifted down, a steady insidious snowfall that coated everything, blurring contours, erasing definition. It was this particulate shroud that created the faint, eerie glow, diffuse and lifeless, like light filtering through a mountain of unwashed linen. Gold was absolute, piercing, unlike anything Skur had ever known. It wasn't the crisp chill of a pre-dawn hunt, or the refreshing bite of a summer rain. This was a primordial cold, a cold that seeped into the very marrow of his bones, a cold that whispered of death. He shivered violently, his body's natural thermoregulation struggling against an atmospheric assault it was never designed to endure. He scraped a claw against the ash, and beneath it, felt the brittle crunch of ice. The world had frozen. And the silence. Oh, the silence was the most profound horror. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, no chirping of insects, no distant roar of a sauropod, no shriek of a bird. The world was utterly, terrifyingly mute. The only sound was the almost inaudible AGS whooshing of the falling ash, and the faint grating whisper of Skur's own ragged breath in the frigid air. It was a silence that pressed down, that screamed of desolation, of absence, of total, unrecoverable loss. Skur took a tentative step, his clawed foot sinking deep into the powdery ash. He pulled it out with effort, the fine particles clinging to his scales. He turned slowly, his head swiveling, his large, intelligent eyes trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. Where was the familiar towering rock face that marked the eastern edge of his territory? Gone. Replaced by a jagged, impossibly tall spire of fractured rock, its summit lost in the ash-filled gloom. Where was the winding river, his source of fresh water? A vast, obsidian-like plain of cracked, frozen sludge now lay where its sparkling waters had flowed. Everything was alien. Every landmark erased, every familiar scent purged, every sound swallowed. He was a creature of instinct, of territory, of routine, and his entire world had been ripped away, replaced by this chilling gray nullity. Humor, not from the earth, but from deep within his own chest, shook him. It was a tremor of dawning understanding, a primal recognition of catastrophe. He was alone, utterly, terribly alone. The air was thick with the scent of burnt minerals, of an unnatural desiccation, a profound emptiness that hurt his nostrils. He tried to whimper, a low, guttural sound, but it was lost in the vast, consuming silence. His stomach gave another painful lurch. Thirst clawed at his throat. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence. His finely tuned senses, once his greatest tools for survival, now overwhelmed him with the sheer scale of the world's destruction. He stumbled forward, a single uncertain step, into the gray wastes. His sharp, predatory teeth, once designed to tear flesh, now clicked together uselessly. What was there to hunt in this wasteland? What was there to eat? The thought, wordless yet clear, formed in his instinct-driven mind. Survive, ID. He lifted his head, a thin plume of vapor escaping his nostrils. His large, dark eyes, despite the perpetual gloom, scanned the horizon, searching for anything, a darker shadow that might be a cave, a warmer pocket of air, a faint, telltale scent that bespoke life, any life. But there was nothing. Only the falling ash, the biting cold, and the crushing eternal silence of a world reborn in ruin. He was a fragment, cast adrift in an impossible new reality, and the first brutal lesson of his new existence was the terrifying, overwhelming knowledge that he was utterly, irrevocably alone. He had survived the end of the world, only to find himself in a world that might not want to be survived. The silent scavenger. The dust never truly settled. It coated everything, a fine gray powder that seemed to absorb the scant light, leaving the ravaged world in a perpetual twilight. Gur, driven by a hunger that gnawed at its very bones, moved through the skeletal remains of what had once been a city. Buildings, once soaring testaments to a vanished species, now lay crumbled and fractured, their concrete ribs exposed to the elements. Twisted metal girders formed grotesque sculptures against the bruised sky, monuments to an instant annihilation. Each step was a calculated risk. The ground was treacherous, littered with rebar spikes, shattered glass, and unidentifiable debris. Skur's three-toed feet, usually agile and silent, sometimes crunched on broken masonry, sending a sharp echo through the profound silence. That silence was the most terrifying thing of all. A vast, empty canvas where the smallest sound became an omen. The wind, when it stirred, whispered through fractured windows and hollowed-out chambers, sounding like the tormented cries of ghosts. The initial shock of the world's end had faded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache of deprivation. Fear had learned, in the hardest way possible, that the vibrant jungles and lush plains it had once known were gone. The very air had changed, tasting of ash and ozone, searing the inside of its nostrils with every breath. Its keen vision, once capable of picking out a lizard from 100 paces, now struggled with the perpetual gloom. Days bled into weeks, marked not by the rising and setting of a sun often obscured by perpetual cloud cover, but by the relentless rhythm of hunger and the desperate search for sustenance. Gur's body, once lean and powerful, was now gaunt, its scales dull. Its movements were economical, every ounce of energy conserved. Instinct, raw and primal, was its only compass. Water was the first priority. Gur's sensitive tongue, flicking out, could detect the faint mineral tang of moisture in the air, the metallic scent of it clinging to the undersides of collapsed structures. It learned to seek out the deepest crevices in the shattered concrete, where rainwater sometimes pooled, undisturbed by the sun. These puddles were often thick with sediment, tasting like pulverized rock, but they were life. When the rare, acid-tinged rain fell, Skur would press itself against a fallen wall, allowing the droplets to cascade down its back, collecting in the hollows of its scales, before lapping them up greedily. It also discovered a network of cracked pipes, deep within the skeletal remains of what might have been a human sewer system, where a trickle of surprisingly clean water persisted, a subterranean lifeline in the desiccated landscape. Getting to it was dangerous, requiring navigating dark, claustrophobic tunnels, but the reward was worth the risk. Food was harder. The familiar vegetation of its past life had vanished. What remained was dead, brittle, or poisonous. Gur, an opportunistic omnivore by nature, had to adapt its palate. Its first few attempts at foraging were painful lessons. A bite of a strangely glowing fungus sent spasms through its muscles, leaving it weak and retching for hours. Another taste of a spindly blackened plant caused its vision to blur. It learned caution, approaching new flora with suspicion, nipping off only the tiniest fragment, waiting for a reaction before committing. Its most reliable source of sustenance became the hardy, tenacious mosses that clung to the damp undersides of overturned vehicles or sprouted in the shadowed cracks of immense fractured boulders. They were sparse, bitter, and provided little nutritional value, but they were consistent. Sker would spend hours meticulously scraping them off surfaces with its sharp teeth, its powerful jaws working with weary patience. Then, it discovered the resilient survivors. Not of its own kind, or even of the larger fauna, but the small, forgotten life that had clung on with a desperate tenacity. Deep within the core of what had once been a skyscraper, its upper floors shorn away by the cataclysm, Sker followed the faint scuttling sounds. The building acted like a gigantic broken chimney, drawing in drafts that carried the subtle scent of decay, and more importantly, life. Here, in the perpetual twilight of the lower levels, protected from the worst of the fallout and wind, small pockets of surprisingly verdant growth had taken root. Fungi, not the poisonous kind, but a pale, fibrous variety, flourished on decaying wood. And in the damp earth that had accumulated in the collapsed basement, a hardy, almost translucent root system had spread, tasting faintly of starch. More significantly, within these hidden enclaves, Sker found the scurrying light. Tiny, multi-legged creatures that looked like overgrown beetles, with iridescent carapaces, swarmed around the roots. They were quick, but Sker was quicker. A darting lunge, a snap of its jaws, and one was gone. They were meager, but numerous enough to provide a vital protein boost. It also discovered small, rat-like mammals, descendants of what might have been human pets or pests, that skittered through the debris. These were harder to catch, requiring a blend of stealth and explosive speed, but the payoff was greater. Sker learned to lie motionless for long stretches, camouflaged against the rubble, its eyes fixated on a rustling patch of debris, waiting for the opportune moment. The greatest challenge, however, was not hunger or thirst, but the other survivors. The catastrophe had forged a new hierarchy, one dominated by desperation. Sker was not alone in this ruined world. Other creatures, equally hungry, equally brutalized by the apocalypse, roamed the desolate landscape. The first close encounter had been with a pack of what looked like mutated, gaunt canines, their fur patchy, their eyes glowing with an unnatural luminescence in the gloom. Sker had caught their scent first, a sharp, acrid odor that spoke of starvation and aggression. Its instinct had screamed danger. It had frozen, pressing itself against a fractured wall, its scales blending with the gray stone. The creatures had trotted past, their bony snouts lifted, sniffing the air, their low growls echoing in the silence. Sker had held its breath, every muscle tensed, until their eerie howls faded into the distance. Another time, while investigating a particularly promising patch of water near a collapsed bridge, Sker heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of a larger creature. It wasn't the sound of its own kind. It was slower, more ponderous, but vast. Sker retreated instantly, scrambling up a precarious slope of rubble, finding purchase with its formidable claws. From its vantage point, it watched a colossal, armored herbivore, a distant relative of what it remembered as a triceratops, but larger, its skin cracked and scarred, its horns chipped. It moved with a slow, grinding determination, its massive head sweeping the ground, searching for any scrap of vegetation. Despite its bulk, it looked emaciated, its power diminished. Sker knew that even a desperate herbivore could be dangerous if cornered. Its bulk, a weapon. It had avoided the area for days afterward. The most unsettling encounters were with others of its own lineage, or at least something similar. The first time, it was a blurred movement in the periphery of its vision, a flash of scaled skin, too quick to fully register. But the scent, though faint, was unmistakable, the musky tang of a predatory reptilian, overlaid with the sour smell of sickness and desperation. Gur immediately changed course, melting into the shadows of a collapsed building. It knew that in this new world, even kin could be threats. Territory was non-existent. Resources were scarce. Every creature was a competitor. Gur developed an almost supernatural awareness of its surroundings. Its hearing, already acute, became finely tuned to the subtle differences in sound. The creak of settling metal that might signify a larger creature's weight, the distinct scuttle of smaller prey, the distant eerie cry of a desperate predator. It learned to read the air, detecting minute shifts in wind direction that could carry a scent, or the almost imperceptible changes in temperature that could signal the presence of a large, warm body nearby. Its strategy became one of constant motion, yet careful concealment. It never stayed in one place for long, moving from one scavenging zone to another, leaving behind only the faintest tracks on the dust. It learned the best routes through the ruins, pathways that offered cover, that were less exposed, that led to the hidden pockets of life it had discovered. It rested in deep, shadowed alcoves, often high up in the fractured remains of buildings, where it could observe its surroundings without being seen. Sleep was light, broken by moments of frantic alertness, its senses constantly scanning, its heart thrumming with a quiet anxiety. One evening, as the perpetual gloom deepened, Gur was meticulously extracting roots from a patch of earth deep within a shattered basement. The air was still, heavy, with the scent of damp soil and decay. Suddenly, a high-pitched shriek ripped through the silence, followed by a series of desperate growls and a sickening crunch. The sounds came from somewhere above, within the upper levels of the same ruined building. Gur froze, a half-extracted root clutched in its jaws. The sounds were not of its own kind, but they spoke of violence, of a kill, of a desperate struggle for survival. It was a stark reminder of the fragile balance it walked. The vibrations of a heavy body moving above reverberated through the very stones, shaking dust from the ceiling. Gur released the root, backing away silently, its eyes fixed on the crumbling stairs leading up. It knew that whatever had just happened, it was not safe to be there. It retreated into the deeper, darker tunnels it had found, preferring the claustrophobic safety of the subterranean world to the brutal reality unfolding above. Weeks turned into a pattern. The days were a relentless cycle of scavenging, hiding, and moving. Gur's mind, once perhaps capable of complex thought, had narrowed, distilled by pure necessity, into a survival machine. Its instincts, honed by the constant threat of starvation and predation, were sharper than ever. It was a ghost in the ruins, a shadow flitting between broken monuments, a testament to the stubborn persistence of life against overwhelming odds. It was gaunt, weary, but it was alive. And in this shattered world, that was everything. A flickering spark. The sky was a bruised gray canvas, perpetually smeared with the ghost of a sun that never quite broke through. Gur, an ancient, armored behemoth, moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a dying clockwork toy. Each step was an act of monumental will, the heavily plated scales along his back, and flanks encrusted with fine, gritty ash, making him blend almost perfectly with the desolation around him. The air, thin and cold, tasted of pulverized rock, and an acrid, metallic tang that clung to his throat. For weeks, perhaps months, time had lost all meaning. This had been his world, an endless, silent expanse of gray. His powerful short legs, usually capable of carrying him through dense primeval forests with lumbering grace, now felt like leaden weights. The last true foliage he'd seen had been withered skeletons, splintered and blasted by the raw fury that had swept across the world. His broad, beak-like mouth, designed for shearing tough cycads and ferns, had known only the bitter grit of ash-choked air and the occasional desperate bite at a desiccated root that offered no sustenance. His immense body, a fortress of bone and keratin, was dwindling, the thick muscle beneath his hide slowly wasting away. His eyes, usually sharp and intelligent, were now dull, clouded with exhaustion, and a despair that even a creature of his monumental fortitude struggled to shake. He was moving, always moving, driven by an instinct older than memory, a faint whisper of survival that refused to be silenced. But the whisper was fading. The wind, a constant mournful wail, carried nothing but the chill of the void and the rustle of loose ash across shattered plains. He stumbled, his massive body lurching, and only his powerful forelegs braced wide saved him from collapsing. A deep, guttural sigh rumbled in his chest, a sound born of profound weariness. He was dying, slowly, inexorably, in a world that had forgotten life. Then, a scent, so faint, so alien to the prevailing stench of ash and decay, that Skur almost dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by starvation. It was a subtle warmth, a dampness that wasn't the bitter cold of the wind, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible greenness, a hint of chlorophyll in a world devoid of it. His small, reptilian brain, honed by eons of survival, latched onto it with a desperate tenacity. He lifted his head, massive and armored, the bony crest above his eyes furrowed in concentration. The scent was there, carried on a whisper of a different current, originating from somewhere to the southwest, beyond a jagged ridge of fractured obsidian. It was a flicker of a candle in an infinite night. His body screamed for rest, for an end to the ceaseless, chilling march. But that scent, that impossible promise, ignited a spark. He turned, slowly, painfully, adjusting his trajectory. Every nerve ending in his body screamed in protest. But the primal urge to investigate, to pursue even the faintest hope, overrode the weariness. The ground became more treacherous. What had been relatively flat, ash-covered plains now gave way to a chaotic landscape of upheaval. Jagged spires of rock, thrust up from the earth's belly, pierced the twilight sky like broken teeth. Deep fissures, cracks in the very fabric of the world, snaked across the terrain, some emitting a faint, noxious vapor that stung his eyes and made his throat constrict. He had to pick his path with agonizing care. His armored tail, usually held aloft, occasionally dragging through drifts of ash, leaving a serpentine trench behind him. His footpads, thick and leathery, ached with every step over the razor-sharp scree. He traversed slopes of loose rock that threatened to give way, sending him tumbling into the abyss below. The air grew subtly warmer, but also denser, cloying, tasting of sulfur and something metallic. The green scent, however, grew stronger, clearer. It was no longer a phantom. It was real. He ascended the final, crumbling ridge, a behemoth defying gravity. Loose rocks clattered down behind him, echoing briefly in the pervasive silence. Reaching the crest, he paused, his chest heaving, steam pluming from his nostrils in the bitter cold. Below him, nestled within a deep, bowl-like depression, was a sight that made his ancient heart tremor with a sensation he hadn't felt in an age: hope. The depression was a crucible of life, a defiant emerald wound in the gray flesh of the dying world. A perpetual mist rose from its center, shimmering faintly in the bruised twilight, hinting at subterranean warmth. The air here was noticeably warmer, thick with the scent of damp earth, rich vegetation, and something else, a subtle, mineral tang of heated stone. The floor of the basin was not the familiar ash-dusted rock, but a vibrant tapestry of greens. Mosses, thick and velvety, clung to the steaming rocks, their color so vivid it almost hurt Skur's light-starved eyes. Ferns, unfurling their delicate fronds, clustered around bubbling pools of water, their fronds glistening with condensation. Small, low-lying shrubs, their leaves a darker, leathery green, hugged the ground, drawing sustenance from the mineral-rich earth. And at the very heart of it all, a geyser, not erupting violently, but steadily venting plumes of scalding steam, its perpetual breath creating a microclimate of impossible warmth. It was a miracle, a remnant, a secret kept by the very bones of the earth. Gur descended into the basin, his movements no longer desperate, but imbued with a nascent urgency. The warmth embraced him like a forgotten memory, thawing the deep chill in his bones. He ignored the stinging steam from the vent, driven by the primal thirst that had gnawed at him for so long. He lowered his massive head to the nearest pool, the water clear and pristine, shimmering with a faint light from the thermal activity below. It was warm, almost hot, but clean. He drank deeply, his throat working convulsively, the water a liquid balm on his parched membranes. He drank until his belly felt distended, until the lightheadedness of dehydration began to recede. Then he turned to the plants. His broad, horny beak, usually a powerful tool for ripping through tough vegetation, now carefully selected the tender emerald fronds of the ferns. He chewed slowly, savoring the unfamiliar burst of moisture, the earthy, slightly metallic taste of living chlorophyll. Each bite was a revelation, a rediscovery of sensation. The nutrients, however sparse, were like elixirs, flowing through his starved system, bringing a tremor of strength to his trembling limbs. He moved from one patch to another, grazing systematically, driven by an instinct that told him this was not a place to waste. He found a sheltered alcove beneath an overhang of rock, warmed by the rising steam, the ground covered in thick, springy moss. With a sigh that sounded like a deflating bellows, he lowered his colossal body, his armored plates settling against the soft, warm cushion. The tension that had held him rigid for weeks, perhaps months, began to melt away. For the first time since the sky had fallen, Skur felt safe. Not truly safe, not yet, but no longer teetering on the precipice of oblivion. As the hours, or perhaps days, passed in a haze of healing sleep and cautious foraging, Skur began to explore the confines of his sanctuary. The pocket of life was surprisingly extensive, perhaps 100 yards across at its widest point, fed by a network of fissures that channeled the Earth's internal heat. The main geothermal vent was indeed the heart, but smaller, less active vents released warm, mineral-rich water into other pools, fostering different micro-ecosystems. Besides the resilient ferns and mosses, he discovered patches of what looked like ancient, tenacious club mosses, their tiny, scale-like leaves a deeper, almost bluish green. Fungi, ghostly pale and translucent, thrived in the shadier, damp recesses, their mycelial networks drawing sustenance from the decaying matter that accumulated here. The air, though always humid and warm, varied in temperature depending on proximity to the vents, creating subtle gradients where different species flourished. There was life beyond the plants, too, though sparse. Tiny, iridescent insects, no bigger than a claw tip, buzzed around the warmer, more humid zones, their brief lives played out in the perpetual twilight. They were mostly detritivores, feeding on decaying plant matter or the mineral deposits from the vents. He saw small, pale, segmented worms burrowing in the damp soil, and once a fleeting glimpse of a creature that looked like a very small, primitive amphibian, skittering into a crevice, its skin a dull gray-green, adapted to the low light. They were all survivors, tenacious fragments of a once vibrant world, clinging to this precious warmth. Skurr, though a herbivore, observed them with a detached curiosity, recognizing fellow fighters in a desolate landscape. Pocket was a delicate balance, a self-contained world. The water, constantly replenished by the vent and condensed steam, flowed outwards, nourishing the outer edges of the green zone before evaporating or seeping into the surrounding ash. The minerals, drawn from deep within the earth, provided the essential nutrients that allowed the plants to grow. It was a testament to the earth's own resilience, a deep-seated pulse of life refusing to be extinguished. The days blurred into a cycle of eating, drinking, and sleeping. Skurr felt his strength slowly, painstakingly return. The dull ache in his muscles began to recede, replaced by a nascent elasticity. The deep hollows above his eyes, testament to his starvation, began to fill out. His armored plates, once caked in thick ash, now shone with a renewed luster, damp from the constant humidity. He felt the weight returning to his powerful frame, the sluggishness replaced by a steady, vital thrum. He would sometimes lie for hours, half submerged in a warm, shallow pool, the mineral-rich water soothing his hide. He watched the steam rise, listened to the gentle gurgle of the water and the faint hum of insect life. It was a stark contrast to the deathly silence outside, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separated this oasis from the desolate expanse. His mind, no longer consumed by the desperate need for survival, began to process the past. The shattering impact, the sky aflame, the choking ash, the endless cold, the slow, agonizing death of his world. He had walked through a graveyard, a monumental testament to an unimaginable cataclysm. Why had he survived? Why Hirang? This pocket of life was a random chance, a geological quirk, a whisper of hope and a scream of despair. It didn't offer answers to the why, only the how life could persist against all odds when given even the smallest foothold. He was a relic, a living fossil, bearing the scars of a new epoch. The world he knew was gone, utterly, irrevocably. This wasn't a return to the verdant forests of his youth. This was a temporary haven, a recharging station. The food here, while vital, was limited. The space, though welcoming, was confined. He could not stay forever. Yet, the reprieve had been crucial. His movements were more fluid now, his senses sharper. The dullness in his eyes had cleared, replaced by a keen, watchful glint. He tested his mace-like tail, swinging it slowly, deliberately, the powerful muscles responding with newfound vigor. He scraped his foreclaws on a rough rock, sharpening them, an ancient ritual of readiness. The world outside remained a mystery, a bleak unknown. But now, Skurr faced it not with the leaden weight of imminent death, but with the quiet resolve of a survivor. He had found a foothold. He had reclaimed a measure of his strength. The journey would continue. The next step, the next breath, would be taken not out of desperation, but out of a fierce, unyielding will to endure. Pocket of life had given him more than sustenance. It had rekindled the very spark of his survival. Soon, the warmth of the vent would feel less like a comfort and more like a cage. Soon, the call of the unknown would be too strong to ignore. The apocalypse had tried to claim him, but Skurr, the ankylosaur, was not done yet. The gauntlet of ice. The constant, brittle kiss of frost clung to everything. Even here, deep within the shielded caldera, where geothermal veins had once breathed a fragile warmth into the world, the chill was no longer a visitor. It was the sole reigning monarch. Skurr huddled low, the shaggy proto-feathered integument that covered its broad, muscled back, ruffling against the icy stone. Its breath plumed in thick, white clouds, each exhalation a visible surrender to the biting air. Months had turned into an eternity since the sky had fractured, since the world had screamed. The initial days had been a blur of ash and terror. Then the slow, agonizing descent into this perpetual twilight. This caldera, a forgotten scar on the Earth's surface, had offered a sanctuary, a pocket of defiance against the spreading death. But even defiance had its limits. The small, resilient patches of fern and hardy moss that had clung to the steaming rock faces were now shriveled husks, their vibrant green faded to a sickly gray-brown. The last time Skur had found anything truly nourishing had been weeks ago. A patch of tough, waxy cycad leaves, bitter but life-sustaining. Now, even those were gone. The air was thin, the light a bruised purple, filtered through an endless, choking shroud of airborne dust and ice crystals. Skur's stomach rumbled, a hollow echo in the vast silence. It dragged itself upright, its powerful legs stiff from the cold. Its claws, usually sharp and capable, scraped against the frozen ground, leaving only faint marks. Persistent ache of hunger was a dull knife turning slowly in its gut, sharper with each passing day. It lumbered towards a familiar crevice, a place where a thin wisp of steam still escaped from a deep fissure. Here, a few desperate sprigs of something, not quite plant, not quite fungus, still clung to life, drawing warmth from the Earth's dying breath. Skur lowered its immense head, its sensitive snout testing the air, then carefully nibbled. The taste was acrid, gritty, offering little more than a fleeting moisture to its parched mouth. It chewed slowly, extracting what microscopic nutrients it could, but its instincts screamed for more. Its body was a furnace running on embers, threatening to go out. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of searching and disappointment. Skur would scour the caldera's inner rim, its keen eyes scanning for any sign of life, any promise of sustenance. Small, scurrying creatures, hardy insects, the occasional rock lizard, had long since vanished or retreated into an unreachable torpor. The few carcasses of other, less fortunate beasts Skur had stumbled upon in the early days of the winter had been picked clean by the ravenous cold and the desperate few scavengers that remained. Now, even carrion was a memory. The only movement was the relentless drift of snow, the only sound the mournful shriek of the wind through the frozen rock formations. Skur remembered a time when the world was green, vibrant, teeming with life. A time when the sun beat down with golden warmth, and the air hummed with the buzz of insects and the rustle of leaves. It remembered the satisfying tier of lush foliage under its beak, the cool, clear water of a running stream. These memories were now like ghosts, tantalizing and torturous, mocking its current reality. Its broad, heavy skull, usually a formidable battering ram, felt heavy, dull. Its vision, though still sharp, seemed to lose definition around the edges, a symptom of its dwindling energy. It would stand for long periods, unmoving, trying to conserve every calorie, every beat of its powerful heart. But even stillness was a battle against the encroaching cold. The air temperature plummeted further each week. Ice crawled up the walls of the caldera, choking the last remnants of warmth. The steam vents, once a source of comfort, now merely sighed, thin and weak. A deep, shuddering tremor ran through the ground. Not an earthquake, but the slow, agonizing contraction of the world under its new glacial burden. The caldera groaned. A sheet of ice, thick as a tree trunk, detached from the upper rim and crashed into the basin with a deafening roar, sending a spray of frozen shards across Skur's hide. This was it. The haven was dying. Its sanctuary was becoming its tomb. The realization struck Skur with the force of a physical blow, sharper than any hunger pang. To stay here was to wait for the final, inevitable freeze. Its instincts, honed by millions of years of ancestral survival, roared a silent imperative. Wei ma. There was nothing left to gain by remaining. Every fiber of its being, every ancient memory embedded in its bones, screamed that the only way to survive was to seek warmth, seek food, seek life. The direction was unknown, the path unseen, but the destination was clear. Anywhere but here. Skur lifted its head, turning its gaze towards the narrow, ice-choked pass that led out of the caldera. It had been sealed for weeks by a fresh landslide of frozen rock and snow, a natural barrier that had once felt like protection. Now, it was a prison wall. Climb would be arduous, dangerous, but the alternative was certain death. A spark, dormant for so long, ignited deep within its chest. A flicker of ancient, unyielding resolve. With a grunt of effort, Skur began to move. Its powerful legs, though stiff, propelled it forward. Each step was deliberate, a testament to its fading strength, but unyielding will. It reached the base of the pass, a treacherous slope of broken rock and compacted snow. The wind howled through the gap, a banshee's cry, lashing Skur's face with needle-sharp ice particles. It dug its formidable claws into the ice, finding purchase where it could. The ascent was slow, agonizing. Snow sloughed off in small avalanches, threatening to send it tumbling back into the basin. Its muscles screamed, its breath hitched in its throat. Several times it slipped, catching itself just before a dangerous fall, its heart hammering against its ribs. The cold seeped into its bones, a numb, aching poison. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity of effort. The sun, a distant, pallid disk in the perpetually overcast sky, crawled imperceptibly across the horizon, offering no warmth, only a faint, diffused light. Finally, with a monumental heave, Skur hauled itself over the lip of the pass, collapsing onto a relatively flat expanse of frozen ground. It lay there for a long moment, chest heaving, steam rising from its weary body. The wind here was worse, untempered by the caldera's walls, sweeping across an endless, featureless plain. This was the true face of the new world. This was desolation. When it finally pushed itself up, the sight that greeted it stole what little breath it had left. Ahead lay an uninterrupted expanse of white, stretching to the bruised horizon under a sky the color of lead. Mountain ranges, once vibrant with forest, were now jagged teeth of ice-scoured rock, their peaks draped in impenetrable glaciers. Rivers were frozen arteries, their ancient courses marked by humps of blue-black ice. Trees, if they existed at all, were ghostly silhouettes, skeletal arms reaching skyward, devoid of leaves or life, their wood brittle and petrified by the unimaginable cold. The air itself seemed to resist movement, heavy with ice dust that glittered ominously in the weak light. The silence was profound, broken only by the mournful keen of the wind and the crunch of Skur's own massive footfalls on the packed snow. Every step was an act of courage, an assertion of life against the immense crushing weight of the apocalypse. Skur's senses, usually so keen, were overwhelmed by the monochrome bleakness. There were no scents of vibrant foliage, no chirps of unseen creatures, no rustle of hidden life. Only the metallic tang of ice, the faint acrid smell of frozen decay that lingered on the wind from unidentifiable sources, and the overwhelming scent of nothingness. It walked, driven by an innate compass that pointed vaguely towards warmer climes, towards the equator, towards any whisper of the world it had once known. Its internal map was a complex tapestry of ancestral knowledge, of sun paths and prevailing winds, now twisted and distorted by the cataclysm. But the in-need remained, the need for warmth, for sustenance. Skur's challenge came not from a predator, but from the land itself. A vast, flat expanse of what appeared to be solid ice lay ahead, shimmering malevolently in the dim light. Skur hesitated, its instincts warning of hidden dangers. Underneath the smooth surface, It sensed the flow of water, a river that had frozen too quickly, too haphazardly. It tested the edge with a claw, then a foot. The ice groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through its very bones. Too thin in places, too treacherous. It could try to cross, risk falling through, or find another way. Time was a luxury it could not afford. Gert chose the long way around. It veered left, following the treacherous, ice-coated bank of the frozen river, adding miles to its already arduous journey. The detour took hours, each step a test of endurance. Its legs ached, its muscles burned, but the imperative to move, to survive, was a relentless drumbeat in its chest. As the bruised light began to fade, hinting at the true, terrifying darkness of the impact night, Skur stumbled upon a macabre tableau. Half buried in a snowdrift were the frozen remains of a herd of herbivores, smaller than itself, their bodies locked in a grotesque dance of death. Their eyes were wide, glazed with ice, their last moments forever etched into the frigid air. They had starved, or frozen, or both. Their flesh was too hard, too frozen to offer any immediate sustenance, even if Skur were desperate enough to try. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, ran down Skur's spine. This was the fate of those who faltered, who succumbed. It was a stark reminder of the immense stakes of its journey. The world was a graveyard, and Skur was walking through it, a solitary ghost of a bygone era. It pressed on, its gaze fixed on the distant, blurry horizon, where a faint, almost imperceptible warmth might one day reside. The cold was a constant companion, the hunger a gnawing beast. But the will to live, to find that impossible warmth, burned fiercely, a defiant ember in the heart of a dying world. Encounters in the Barrens. The wind, a constant, mournful companion, scoured the skeletal landscape, whispering through the broken teeth of ancient forests and rasping across fields of dust. Skur moved with an unyielding rhythm, each thudding step a testament to a will forged in catastrophe. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the shifting light of a sun that seemed dimmer, more distant than he remembered. His scales, once a vibrant, healthy green, were now dulled by grime and the relentless abrasion of wind-borne grit. His stomach growled with a hollow ache that was a constant, familiar thrum beneath his ribs. But he pushed it down, focusing instead on the faint, elusive scent of water, the memory of green. He traversed a vast, cracked plain, where the earth yawned in fissures and petrified trees lay like fallen titans. A sickly, yellowish light bathed the horizon, a reminder of the lingering dust veil that still choked the upper atmosphere. Up ahead, a darker, low-lying shape resolved itself into a mound, then, unmistakably, a creature. Skur slowed, his massive head tilting, nostrils flaring. The scent was unmistakable, herbivore, but tainted with the heavy sweetness of decay, the metallic tang of blood. He approached cautiously, his heavy tail held low, sweeping the cracked earth. It was a triceratops, a male of immense size, its frill as wide as Skur's own chest, its 3 horns thick and formidable, even in death. But it was not death yet. The great creature lay on its side, one foreleg twisted at an unnatural angle, the hide around it torn and festering. Its once powerful body was a sunken ruin, ribs starkly defined beneath the leathery skin. One eye, clouded and filmed with mucus, flickered open as Skur drew near, a slow, agonizing blink. There was no fear in it, only a profound, weary acceptance. Its breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps, each exhalation a struggle. Skur circled it slowly, the dust puffing softly around his feet. He recognized the type of wound, not from a predator, but from a fall, perhaps. a tumble down a rock face, or the collapse of unstable ground. In the old world, a broken leg might mend, or at least be quickly ended by a hungry carnivore. In this world, it meant slow starvation, a lingering, torturous end. There was no pack, no herd to protect the injured, no vibrant ecosystem to recycle the weak. Just this, a solitary agony. He lowered his head, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. A sound that in other times might have been a challenge, now perhaps a recognition. The Triceratops did not stir, its massive bulk unmoving save for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. Ker saw the raw, exposed bone, the flies already buzzing, anointing the wound. He saw the vastness of its suffering, and a chilling thought pierced through his own instinct for survival. This is what happens. This was the brutal arithmetic of the New World. If a beast of this magnitude, with its formidable defenses and sheer power, could be reduced to this, what hope was there? He stood for a long moment, watching the dying creature. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the plain. The air grew colder. Finally, with a soft sigh of air from his nostrils, Ger turned. There was nothing to be done, nothing to be gained. The Triceratops was a relic, a monument to a world that no longer existed, a stark reminder of the fragile thread upon which all life now hung. He moved on, leaving the dying Leviathan to its solitary vigil, its final breath swallowed by the vast, indifferent emptiness. The land continued its relentless transformation. What was once lush forest was now a skeletal tangle of splintered wood, brittle and dry. Rivers were choked with ash and sediment, reduced to trickles or vast parched beds of cracked clay. Ger learned to identify the subtle signs of underground water, scraping away layers of dust to find damp earth, or following the faint, hopeful scent of moisture carried on the wind. Food was a constant, desperate hunt. He devoured the tough, fibrous remains of ancient ferns that miraculously clung to life in sheltered crevices, or tore at the bark of stubborn, gnarled trees that refused to yield. Each bite was a victory, each gulp of muddy water a blessing. He skirted the edge of a deep ravine, its sides streaked with ancient volcanic ash. Wind here was a howling gale, pushing him sideways. He kept to the higher ground, his massive claws digging for purchase. It was then he smelled them, a faint, musky scent, overlaid with something sharp like fear. He paused, lowering his snout to the ground. The scent was small, numerous, and unfamiliar. Not a dinosaur. He moved forward. Slow, cautious steps. The ravine widened slightly, revealing a cluster of fractured boulders, forming a rough alcove. From within it, a series of high-pitched squeaks and chirps erupted, followed by a low, comforting cooing sound. Ger peered around a jagged outcrop of rock. There, nestled amongst the stones, was a den, and spilling from its entrance, no larger than his own foreclaw, were tiny, furred creatures. They were Purgatorius, no doubt, those small, resourceful proto-primates, or perhaps an early relative of the multituberculates, those rat-like, tenacious survivors. They scrambled with surprising agility, their small, bright eyes darting, their long, twitching noses sniffing the air. One, slightly larger than the others, was nudging a patch of withered roots, trying to dislodge them. A sudden, sharp cry split the air. One of the larger mammals, its fur a mottled brown, darted from the den, snatching up a tiny, squeaking young one that had ventured too close to the edge of a small, unstable scree slope. It clutched the infant fiercely to its belly, its small body bristling with primal protective. Ger watched, mesmerized. He had seen young before, in the old world. His own kind hatching from their massive eggs, fiercely guarded by their parents. But these creatures, so small, so seemingly insignificant against the vastness of the devastated world, exhibited a fierce, tenacious will to live that resonated even with him. They scrabbled for every scrap, burrowed into the earth for shelter, and defended their tiny, fragile offspring with a courage that belied their size. He shifted his weight, a low growl rumbling in his throat, an unconscious sound of observation rather than aggression. Immediately, every tiny head snapped up. The squeaking stopped. The larger mammals froze, their fur bristling, their eyes wide with terror. They gathered their young, herding them back into the dark maw of the den, a flurry of brown fur and desperate cries. Sker remained still, observing. He could crush them with a single step. He could devour them in a single gulp, though he knew they would provide little sustenance. But there was no hunger for them, only a strange curiosity. They were so different, yet so alike in their desperation. They clung to life with the same fierce tenacity, carving out their existence in the same ruined world. He saw their fear, but also their resilience, their ability to adapt and survive in ways that his own kind, so dominant in their prime, never had to. They were truly the children of this new age, small, swift, and adaptable. He let out another soft snort of air, then turned away. He had no quarrel with them. They were not competition, nor were they prey. They were simply fellow survivors, navigating their own, equally brutal path. The scent of them faded as he lumbered away, leaving them to their precarious existence in the shadow of the ravine. The days continued, a monotonous cycle of searching, moving, surviving. The sun beat down or the chill wind tore at him. The landscape offered no comfort, no respite. It was a relentless test of endurance. He was following a faint, almost imperceptible dry riverbed, hoping it might lead to a hidden spring. The air was still, heavy with the scent of dust and heat. He heard it then, a low guttural snarl followed by the scuttling of claws on rock. Sker froze, his senses on high alert. This was a different scent. Predator, but not the scent of the massive tyrannosaurs of old. This was lighter, leaner, tinged with a desperate, wild hunger. He moved silently, picking his way between a jumble of ancient, shattered boulders. The riverbed opened into a wider, shallow basin, and there they were. A pack of 5 utahraptors, not the sleek, powerful hunters of the old world. These were gaunt, their scales dull, their eyes sunken and feverish with starvation. Their infamous sickle claws, once razor-sharp and deadly, were chipped and blunted, their teeth worn. They were fighting over something small, indistinct in the dust. A carcass no bigger than a large rodent. Snarling, snapping at each other, their bodies trembled with the effort of the struggle. Sker watched them, hidden by the boulders. He recognized the desperate hunger in their movements, the same hollow ache that gnawed at his own belly. But theirs was a hunger that drove them to fratricide, to turn on each other for a meager mouthful. One of them, the largest, managed to wrench a scrap free from the others. Its head snapped up, eyes scanning, its nostrils flaring. It caught Sker's scent. A low growl rumbled in its throat, a sound of warning, not confidence. Its head tilted, assessing the colossal figure emerging from the shadows. The other raptors, alerted by its sudden stillness, looked up too. Their eyes, once predatory and bold, now held a glint of something else. Weariness, perhaps even fear. Sker was massive, a living mountain of muscle and bone. He was clearly not weakened, not an easy target. Their desperation warred with their instinct for self-preservation. Sker took a slow, deliberate step forward, his immense weight shaking the very ground. A low, resonant rumble vibrated deep within his chest, a sound that carried the weight of his size, his power, his unyielding will. It was not a roar of aggression, but a declaration. I am here, and I am not prey. What? The largest Utahraptor flinched, its head lowering slightly. It took a hesitant step back, then another. Its eyes flickered from Skur to the paltry scrap of meat in its jaws. The choice was clear. A fight with Skur, a creature of such magnitude, would mean injury, perhaps death, and no guarantee of a meal. The scrap of meat, however meager, was a sure thing. With a final, frustrated snarl directed not at Skur, but at the cruel, empty world, the Utahraptor turned and darted away, its packmates scrambling after it, melting into the broken landscape like shadows. They were remnants, ghosts of a past reign, clinging to life with desperate ferocity, yet smart enough to recognize a threat they could not overcome. Skur watched them go, then moved into the basin. The carcass they had been fighting over was nothing but scraps of fur and bone. He nudged it with his snout, then discarded it. It offered nothing. He lifted his head, scanning the bleak horizon. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the dust-choked sky in bruised purples and oranges. The air grew colder, the wind picking up its mournful song. The dying triceratops, the scurrying mammals, the desperate raptors, all were merely facets of the same brutal reality. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest dinosaur, was locked in a solitary, unforgiving struggle for existence. And he, Skur, was no different. He was a creature of the old world. A relic, yet he persisted. He had survived the fire, the dust, the famine. He had witnessed the death throes of a world and the agonizing birth of another. And with each grueling step, he carried the memory of what was lost, and the unyielding, fierce hope for what might yet be found. He turned, his massive frame a silhouette against the fading light, and continued his journey, one heavy, resolute step after another, into the relentless embrace of the endless, shattered land. The hidden oasis. The ash-laden wind, a relentless tormentor since the sky had fractured, clawed at Skur's scales. It had been days, perhaps weeks. The concept of time had blurred into an endless cycle of numb exhaustion, since the last true rain had scoured the gray dust from the air. Now every breath was a rasping effort, drawing in particulate matter that grated in its lungs, leaving a raw ache behind its ribs. Its vision, once keen enough to spot a skittering beetle from 100 paces, was perpetually hazed. The world reduced to shades of ochre and charcoal, defined only by the skeletal outlines of what had once been towering trees. Skur's hind legs, thick with muscle, but now atrophiating, trembled with each laborious step. Its claws, usually sharp anchors on rock and soil, dragged through the shifting layers of pulverized earth, leaving trails that spoke of a creature on the precipice of collapse. Hunger was a constant, gnawing void, a dull roar in its belly that overpowered every other sensation, even the burning thirst that cracked its tongue. It had gnawed on withered roots, chewed at the sparse, leathery remnants of scrub brush that had somehow survived the initial inferno, but these were hollow calories, offering only a fleeting suppression of the inevitable. Its own body was consuming itself, a slow, agonizing process. The faint scent of distant, impossible water, or the faint metallic tang of unburnt flora. Mirages, nothing more. It had navigated the vast cratered plains, scaled slopes of shattered granite, and descended into chasms where the air grew thick with acrid fumes. Each sunrise brought not warmth, but a sickly, filtered light that painted the desolation in hues of despair. Other survivors, if they existed, were either too far gone to register or too dangerous to approach. Skur, a creature of modest size and cautious disposition, had learned quickly that the greatest threat was not always the colossal, lumbering beasts of memory, but the cunning, desperate few who would turn on anything that moved. Solitude was its only shield. The land had begun to subtly change, or perhaps Skur's failing senses were playing tricks. For 2 days now, it had been climbing a gradual incline, a long sloping ridge that seemed to promise nothing but more of the same bleak expanse. But as it crested a particularly jagged spur, a peculiar sensation pricked at its nostrils. Not the familiar tang of ash and ozone, nor the stale scent of desiccated earth, but something else. Something cleaner. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, a whisper of damp earth, a ghost of green. It could have been a trick of the wind, a hallucination brought on by dehydration, but it sparked a flicker of desperate animal hope deep within its exhausted core. Driven by this fragile thread, Skur pushed on, its muscles screaming in protest. The ground beneath its feet shifted from loose screed to something firmer, packed, and almost clay-like. A faint hum, like the distant thrum of insect wings, reached its ears, too soft to be definitive, too persistent to ignore. The air, though still heavy, felt less abrasive, less biting. It clawed its way up another short rise, its forelimbs scrabbling, its breath coming in ragged gasps. And then, without warning, the world opened up. It was not a sudden burst of vibrant life. No, not like the world before. But it was undeniably different. Below, nestled within a colossal, bowl-shaped depression, shielded on all sides by towering, unbroken cliffs that curved inwards like the gnarled fingers of a petrified hand, lay a sight that made Skur freeze. The cliffs themselves, unlike the fractured, soot-stained peaks it had traversed for so long, bore signs of old, deep erosion, their surfaces smoothed and pocked, suggesting they had stood against the elements for eons, perhaps acting as an impenetrable bulwark. Within this geological cradle, a faint haze of verdant green, muted but undeniable, clung to the valley floor. It wasn't the lush, ancient foliage of Skur's earliest memories, but a patchwork quilt of low-lying plants. Gray-green mosses carpeted damp patches, interrupted by clumps of hardy, dark-leafed ferns that seemed to absorb the meager, filtered sunlight with a grim determination. Strange, bulbous fungi, pale and luminous, clustered in the shadowy crevices of rocks, their caps unfurling like alien blooms. A thin, silvery thread of water, glinting like liquid mercury, snaked its way through the center of the valley, carving a shallow, pebble-lined channel. Skur's senses, dulled by suffering, flared to life. The air here was cool, damp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of decay and growth. It was still tainted by the distant, pervasive smell of ash, but beneath that, there was a complex tapestry of fragrances, the mineral tang of damp stone, the sharp, pungent aroma of unfamiliar vegetation, and the faint, unmistakable scent of fresh water. The hum it had heard now resolved into the low buzz of insects, a sound it hadn't registered in weeks, perhaps months. Life. Small, tenacious, but life. Part. A low whimper, a sound Skur barely recognized as its own, escaped its throat. It was not a cry of despair, but of raw, primal disbelief. Every instinct screamed caution. This could be a trap, a mirage, a cruel trick of the ravaged landscape. Yet, the overwhelming allure of water, of food, of a moment's respite from the crushing weight of the apocalypse, pulled it forward. Slowly, tentatively, Skur began the descent. The path down was steep, littered with loose scree and ancient, fractured boulders, remnants of the impact that had clearly struck the protective cliff faces, but failed to breach the valley's core. Each clawed step was deliberate, testing the unstable ground. Its heart hammered against its ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden shocking silence of the valley, compared to the howling winds outside. As it drew closer, the details sharpened. The green was actually a mosaic of shades, deep, almost black greens of the resilient ferns, the paler, almost yellow-green of tough, low-lying grasses, and the startling, vibrant emerald of mosses, clinging to the perpetually damp rock faces, where the trickle of water, the stream, no wider than Skir's foreleg, was crystal clear, revealing a bed of smooth, dark pebbles. It moved with a serene purpose, cutting through the center of the valley like a lifeline. The thirst was a burning fire now, overriding all caution. Skir staggered towards the stream, its legs buckling, and plunged its snout into the cool, life-giving water. It drank deeply, long, shuddering gulps, feeling the liquid course through its parched throat, a sensation so profound it brought a wave of dizziness. The world seemed to swim before its eyes, and for a long moment, it simply lay there, snout still submerged, the cool water a balm against its overheated scales. After the initial, desperate quenching, Skir lifted its head, water dripping from its jaws. Its vision was clearer now, the dull ache in its head receding. It could see the minute movements in the undergrowth. A tiny, iridescent beetle, scuttling across a patch of moss. A silvery winged fly, buzzing lazily around a strange, bell-shaped flower. These were the smallest of survivors, the insects and arachnids that had burrowed deep or found refuge in the most unlikely of places, now emerging to reclaim the quiet, sheltered pockets of the world. And then, food. Not the abundance of before, but enough. Skir cautiously nosed through a patch of the dark-leafed ferns. They smelled earthy, slightly bitter, but edible. It nipped at a frond, testing the texture. It was tough, fibrous, but yielded to its bite. The taste was sharp, resinous, a jolt to its senses after weeks of tasteless desperation. It ate slowly, methodically, chewing each bite thoroughly, extracting every nutrient. It found small, fleshy tubers buried beneath the moss, their skin rough, but their interior starchy and satisfying. This was not a feast, but it was sustenance, real sustenance, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. With the belly finally full, if not overflowing, Skir sought shelter. Near the far end of the valley, where the cliff face rose sheer and unbroken, a series of shallow caves marred the rock. One, deeper than the rest, beckoned. The air inside was cool, still, carrying the faint mineral scent of rock and the faint sweet smell of undisturbed earth. Skir curled up, its tail tucked close, its head resting on its forelimbs. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle trickle of the stream outside and the faint distant hum of the surviving insects. For the first time in an age, Skir truly rested. No dust storm, no howling wind, no burning ash, no predatory shadows in the gloom. Just the cool, solid rock and the promise of a night free from endless vigilance. When Skir awoke, it was to the filtered light of the new day, softer, less oppressive than the outside world. The valley was bathed in a diffuse amber glow, filtering through the lingering atmospheric haze that still clung to the sky, even here. It stretched, feeling the unfamiliar relaxation of its muscles, the subtle shift in its body as some energy returned. Today, it would explore. It spent the next few hours meticulously investigating its new sanctuary. The valley, it discovered, was smaller than it had first seen from above, perhaps a mile long and half a mile wide at its broadest point. Its isolation was its salvation. The sheer curving cliffs had evidently created a microclimate, trapping moisture and deflecting the worst of the impact's immediate fallout. The sparse vegetation here was tenacious, not thriving, but enduring. Gurr noted patches of hardy, low-lying succulents that clung to cracks in the rocks, storing what little water they could. There were also strange, thin-stemmed plants with broad, flat leaves that seemed almost translucent, designed to capture every photon of light. This was a new emergent ecosystem forged in the crucible of disaster. Signs of other life were scarce but present. Terror found the tiny, three-toed tracks of what appeared to be small lizard-like creatures near the water's edge, no bigger than its own thumb. There were faint rustlings in the deeper fern beds, sounds it couldn't identify, but which spoke of movement. It even spotted a small dark bird, its feathers dull and its flight hesitant, flitting between the higher cracks in the cliff face, likely nesting there. This was not the vibrant, teeming world of before, but a muted, struggling echo, a tenacious testament to life's stubborn will. The stream, Skur observed, was fed by a series of fissures high in the cliff face, seemingly drawing from an underground reservoir. This was crucial. An endless clean supply of water, untainted by the surface world's poisons. It followed the stream to its source, a deep, shadowed cleft where the rock wept continuous, clear droplets. Here, the moss was thickest, the air sweetest. It also discovered several small, cave-like formations at the base of the cliffs, some containing mineral deposits that gleamed faintly in the gloom. The most surprising discovery was a small patch of land near the stream, where the soil was unusually dark and rich. Here, a few larger plants had taken root, perhaps survivors from ancient seeds or remnants that had clung to life in a particularly sheltered spot. One such plant, a gnarled, twisted thing with thick, bark-like skin, bore small, dark berries. Gurr cautiously sampled one. It was tart, but edible, offering a different kind of sustenance. This was a place of resilience, where life found a way, even if it meant adapting into new, unrecognizable forms. The valley was not without its dangers, however. While no large predators seemed to have made it here, Skur spotted the slithering form of a venomous-looking snake, its scales mottled and dull, disappearing into a rock crevice. Food, while present, was not abundant enough for a large population. Any competition would be fierce, and the valley, for all its protection, was still a fragile pocket. The sky above remained perpetually veiled, and the occasional rumble from the world beyond the cliffs served as a grim reminder of the devastation that still reigned outside. Yet, as Skur settled down that evening, watching the last vestiges of pale light fade from the cliff tops, a profound sense of something akin to peace settled over it. This wasn't home, not in the way the ancient forests had been, but it was a refuge, a temporary reprieve from the relentless fight for existence. Here, it could find water and some food. Here, it could rest without the constant draining fear. Here, life clung on, mutated and diminished, but present. Skur, the lone survivor, had stumbled upon a forgotten world within a ruined one, and for the first time in a very long time, the crushing weight of utter hopelessness eased, replaced by a cautious, tentative spark of survival. This valley, Skur realized, was not an ending, but a new, arduous beginning. A new order. The world, once a canvas of stark ash and skeletal silence, began to soften at its edges. Weeks bled into months with the slow, inexorable turning of the planet, each cycle of sun and moon painting new, faint strokes of life onto the ravaged landscape. Skur, a solitary monument to an age of titans, felt the shift less as a sudden tremor and more as a creeping tide, an almost imperceptible invasion of sound and scent into its desolate domain. The biting winds, once thick with the acrid dust of cosmic annihilation, now carried a different tang, the damp, earthy breath of reawakening soil, the nascent sweetness of resilient spores unfurling in the damp crevices of cooled rock. Gur, with the ancient wisdom etched into its very bones, noted the subtle changes first in the ground beneath its colossal feet. Patches of gray ash, once barren and lifeless, began to blush with the faint, mossy green of pioneering lichens. Then came the tenacious fungi, pushing up their pale ghostly caps from the damp decay, drawing sustenance from the very remnants of the old world. Water, too, found its rhythm. The skies, no longer choked by debris, wept with a gentle persistence, carving new rivulets into the scarred earth, refilling the basins that had once evaporated into steam. Around these burgeoning oses, the first true plants took root, hardy ferns unfurling their delicate fronds, tough grasses spiking through the softening ash, their roots delving deep, anchoring the shifting topsoil. Gur, a creature of instinct and immense memory, observed these small miracles with a detached, almost melancholic curiosity. It was a world rebuilding, but not Witzig world. The first true signs of life, beyond the microscopic, were the insects. A low hum, a persistent buzz, replaced the wind's mournful sigh. Beetles, iridescent and scuttling, emerged from beneath rocks, their segmented bodies navigating the nascent moss. Flies, quick and opportunistic, danced in the shafts of sunlight. Spiders, delicate architects of invisible webs, cast their traps between the skeletal branches of what were once mighty trees, now standing as silent monuments to a lost forest. For Skur, these were not food. They were simply etherain, a background hum of ceaseless activity, a testament to life's relentless drive. Then came the rustles, the skittering movements in the burgeoning undergrowth. Sounds that were not the wind, not the creak of settling earth, but the purposeful, frantic beat of tiny hearts. These were the first children of the new world, the inheritors of the dust, and they were, overwhelmingly, mammals. Skur first noticed them near a bubbling spring. It often frequented, a place where the young grasses were already a vibrant green. A blur of movement, no larger than one of Skur's smallest claws, darted from beneath a fallen log, its whiskers twitching, its eyes bright and bead-like with a primal alertness. It was a creature of quick, nervous energy, a small rodent, its fur a dappled brown that blended seamlessly with the nascent soil. It snatched a tender shoot, gnawed at it with astonishing speed, and then vanished back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Skur, a predator built for the hunt of vast, lumbering prey, found these new creatures almost beneath its notice. They offered no challenge, no substantial meal. But their sheer tenacity was remarkable. Where the great sauropods had needed acres of lush foliage to sustain their bulk, these new creatures thrived on mere mouthfuls, on fallen seeds, on the very detritus of decay. They burrowed into the soft earth, carving intricate networks of tunnels that offered refuge from the still harsh elements and what few predators remained. They reproduced with an astonishing speed, their litters frequent and numerous, ensuring the survival of their kind even as individuals fell victim to chance or the lingering dangers of the altered world. As months folded into a new season, Skur began to see them everywhere. Not just the scurrying rodents, but others. Creatures with longer limbs and twitching noses, resembling the ancestors of deer, browsing cautiously on the new, sparse shrubs. Others, small and sharp-toothed, their bodies sleek and low to the ground, hunted the rodents with the same predatory instinct that drove Skur itself, albeit on a far smaller scale. These were the shrew-like carnivores, the early weasels and their kin, lean and efficient, filling the mini-niches left by the smaller extinct raptors. One afternoon, as Skur rested by a newly formed pond, its heavy eyelids half closed, it witnessed a particularly poignant scene. A creature, furry and gray, with a long prehensile tail and intelligent dark eyes, was meticulously turning over pebbles at the water's edge, searching for grubs. It moved with a cautious agility Skur hadn't seen in anything for a very long time. It was an early primate, perhaps, or a close cousin, an arboreal creature by nature, now adapting to a world largely devoid of trees, but finding solace and sustenance on the re-emerging ground. As it worked, a tiny, half-grown replica of itself tumbled out from behind a clump of reeds, squeaking plaintively. The adult immediately scooped it up, holding it close, its eyes darting around with an almost human anxiety. Skur watched, motionless. The sheer vulnerability, yet the fierce protectiveness, was something it had witnessed countless times in the world that was. But then, it was always on a grander scale, with the earth shaking beneath the feet of stampeding herds, or the sky darkening with the shadow of immense wings. Now, it was this tiny drama, played out silently on a patch of damp earth, a microcosm of life's enduring struggle. The difference in scale was profound. Skur, a creature that had been designed by eons of evolution to dominate a world of giants, now found itself an anomaly. Its own hunting strategies, once honed to perfection, were becoming increasingly difficult to employ. The last of the larger prey animals were scarce, their numbers decimated, their survival precarious. Skur still found them, a lone, dying triceratops-like creature, or the carcass of a smaller herbivore, picked clean by the elements and scavengers. But the abundance of the old world was gone, and these new creatures, while numerous, were too small, too fast, too energy inefficient to hunt. They existed in a different dimension of scale, a different ecosystem entirely. The ecological niches once filled by the diverse and enormous reptilian forms were now being usurped. The burrowers, the climbers, the quick-moving foragers, these were the roles the mammals excelled at. They didn't need vast territories. A small patch of re-emerging vegetation, a cluster of rocks for shelter, was enough. They reproduced before a predator could even register their presence, their population curves spiking with incredible speed. Their warm blood allowed them to function in the fluctuating temperatures of the post-apocalyptic world more effectively than the cold-blooded behemoths of the past. Skur, in its solitary wanderings, often came across the remnants of the old world, a colossal femur, bleached white by time and sun, or the unmistakable imprint of a fellow dinosaur's claw in now solidified mud. These were ghosts. And then, there were the new creatures, vibrant and alive, scurrying through the shadows of these very bones, building their nests in the hollows of ancient skulls. It was a stark visual metaphor, a constant, undeniable reminder of what was and what now we see. A quiet acceptance settled upon Skur. It was not a defeat, but a recognition of a profound shift. The world had not ended. It had simply changed its mind about who should inherit it. Skur was a survivor, yes, but it was also a living fossil, an echo in a world of whispers. It continued its hunt, its search for sustenance, its ancient instincts guiding it through the transformed landscape. But now, amidst the silence, there was also the rustle of tiny feet, the faint chirps and squeaks, the undeniable evidence that life, in its smallest, most resilient forms, had found a way to not just survive, but to truly thrive, filling the vast silence. And Skur, the last of them, watched. The lone survivor's legacy. The world was a tapestry woven from ash and memory. Years had passed, though Skur measured time not in the turning of seasons, but in the slow shift of rock faces, the silent crumbling of ancient mountains, and the accumulating weight of scars across his own hide. The young, reckless titan of the initial cataclysm was gone. replaced by something leaner, wiser. Its immense power, tempered by an equally immense patience. Gur carried the world's weight in his eyes. The unblinking golden gaze that had seen more death than any creature before him, and still found cause to live. His stride, once a ground-shaking thunder, was now a disciplined whisper across the cracked earth. Every placement of his colossal, three-toed foot was deliberate, an act of conservation. He moved like a shadow, a ghost of an apex predator in a world that no longer offered true apex prey. The sprawling herds of ceratopsians and hadrosaurs were phantoms, their colossal bones bleached monuments on distant, wind-scoured plains. Gur hunted smarter now, not harder. Today's target was a family of nimble, armored reptiles, barely larger than his skull, that had adapted to scuttle through the sparse, thorny scrub. They were quick, their plates surprisingly resilient, but they were predictable. They sought the meager water source trickling from a basalt fissure twice a day. Skur knew this. He had learned this. He had arrived at the fissure before dawn, an eternity before. The pre-dawn sky was a bruised purple, streaked with veins of sickly green where residual atmospheric toxins reacted with the rising sun. Gur pressed his vast, scaly bulk into a shallow depression, his charcoal gray hide blending seamlessly with the surrounding volcanic rock. He lowered his immense head, resting his chin on the cracked earth, and waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed, a sickly yellow orb in a haze-filled sky. Heat shimmered off the ground, distorting the skeletal silhouettes of petrified trees. Flies, survivors themselves, buzzed lazily around him, drawn to the faint scent of old blood and ancient hide. Skur remained motionless, a colossal sculpture carved from patience. His respiration was shallow, almost imperceptible. Only the slow, steady thump of his heart against the parched ground was testament to the life within him. Finally, a rustle. 3 of the armored reptiles, their scales shimmering with iridescent blues and greens, emerged from the scrub. Their tiny watchful eyes darted around, assessing the quiet landscape. They were cautious, but thirst drove them. One by one, they approached the trickling water, lapping with quick, nervous movements. Skur identified the largest, a mature male, with a particularly ornate frill. This one would yield the most sustenance. The wind was at his back, carrying his scent away from them. The ground was loose, making a swift charge difficult. He would need to be close, and devastatingly fast. He waited for the reptiles to turn their backs, engrossed in their drinking. When they did, a flicker of movement, a ripple in the still air, was the only warning. Skur exploded from his resting place, a gray blur of scaled muscle and raw power. He didn't roar. He didn't waste breath. His short, powerful legs propelled him forward with surprising agility for his size. In 3 heartbeats, he was upon them. The targeted male barely registered the shadow before Skur's vast jaws clamped down. There was a sound of crunching bone and splitting plates, a final desperate thrash. The other 2 reptiles scattered, vanishing back into the scrub in a frantic scramble. Skur ignored them. His hunt was successful. He lifted the lifeless form, shook it once, severing the neck, then began to tear. The meat was stringy, but nourishing. Every calorie counted. He consumed his kill methodically, leaving little waste. The bones, even the toughest plates, would eventually be ground down by his powerful stomach acids. When he was done, only a faint blood stain on the rock remained. He then ambled to the fissure himself, lowering his head to drink deep of the precious, slightly metallic water. The world was still brutal, but Skur was no longer its victim. He was its enduring, adaptable master. His travels now were less about desperate wandering and more about methodical exploration of his known territory. He had mapped, in his vast reptilian brain, the network of dry riverbeds that provided shelter, the handful of rock overhangs that offered respite from the ash-laden downpours, and the scattered oases where strange, resilient flora clustered around hidden springs. He knew the paths the scavengers took, the flight patterns of the immense, leathery-winged carrion birds that circled endlessly overhead. He was a creature of instinct, yes, but also of profound, lived experience. One cycle of the pale, distant moon. Skur ventured further than he had in many years. A shift in the prevailing winds had carried an unfamiliar scent, subtle but persistent, from the direction of the jagged black mountains that formed the eastern boundary of his domain. It was a scent that prickled the scales on his neck, a scent that stirred something deep within his ancient lineage, a memory of a time before solitude was the only constant. It was the scent of a large theropod. He moved with an unparalleled caution, his footsteps lighter than usual, his head low, constantly testing the air. The terrain grew harsher here, steep scree slopes giving way to narrow, echoing canyons. The sun, when it broke through the perpetual haze, cast stark shadows that danced and writhed like unseen spirits. For days, he followed the ephemeral scent, a ghost trail in a ghost world. Hope, a sensation he had long forgotten, began to stir in his vast chest, mingled with a primal apprehension. Was it a competitor? A threat? Or something else entirely? Then he heard it. A low, mournful rumble that vibrated through the very bedrock. It was a call, distant but unmistakable, a sound that only a creature of his kind could make. A lament for lost kin, or perhaps a challenge. Skur stopped, his tail rigid, his every muscle tensed. He returned the call, a deep, resonant bellow that ripped through the canyon, carrying the weight of his solitary years, the vastness of his survival. Silence followed, then another rumble, closer this time and filled with a raw power that matched his own. Skur moved towards it, driven by an instinct far older than the apocalypse itself. He found her at a place of stark beauty, a hidden caldera, its ancient volcano, long dormant, now filled with a shimmering emerald-green lake, fed by underground springs. Sparse, gnarled trees, mutated by the long years of harshness, clung to the inner slopes, their leaves a deep, metallic green. It was an oasis, a pocket of defiant life in a dead world. And there, at the edge of the lake, was another. She was immense, nearly as large as he, her scales a darker, charcoal gray, almost black in the low light. Her hide was a roadmap of survival, crisscrossed with jagged scars, one eye milky white from an old injury. Her left hind leg bore a slight, almost imperceptible limp, a testament to some forgotten battle. But despite the wounds, she exuded a terrible, ancient grace. She was a female in Tyrannosaurus rex diet. She was a miracle. Their initial encounter was a standoff, a dance of primal power and caution. They circled each other slowly, vast reptilian brains assessing, calculating. Low growls rumbled in their chests, a symphony of territoriality and fear. Skur lowered his head, a display of strength, then raised it, exposing his throat, a gesture of non-aggression, a testament to the profound need that overshadowed all else. The female, whom Skur instinctively named Kaya in his own way, responded in kind, a soft huff escaping her nostrils, her tail sweeping the ground in a slow, almost languid arc. They were both survivors, forged in the same crucible of desolation. The shared understanding was palpable, an invisible tether between the last two titans. For days, They coexisted in the caldera, a truce born of necessity and incomprehensible solitude. They hunted separately, yet always aware of the other's presence. Ger would track the agile goat-like creatures that somehow thrived on the caldera's slopes, bringing down one with a swift, brutal lunge. Kaya, with her slight limp, favored ambushes near the water's edge, preying on the large, sluggish amphibians that burrowed in the lake's muddy banks. They never shared a kill, but they shared the silence, the vast, echoing quiet that was their world. Slowly, imperceptibly, the truce deepened into something more. They would rest near each other, their colossal bodies providing a mutual warmth against the chill of the dying nights. They would drink from the same lake, their immense heads side by side, golden eyes meeting across the shimmering surface. A subtle nuzzle, a brushing of scales, a shared roar at a distant, encroaching dust storm. These were their declarations. They were no longer alone. The instinct came upon them with the onset of the next cool season, a primal urge that superseded all caution. The world was dying, but they were life, resolute, and defiant. They began to search for a place, a sanctuary for the future. They found it on the northern face of the caldera, a vast, sheltered cave, hidden by a cascading curtain of petrified rock formations. Inside, the air was still and warm, protected from the biting winds and the falling ash. The floor was soft, composed of centuries of decayed plant matter and fine volcanic silt. It was perfect. Together, they prepared the nest. Ger used his immense snout to clear loose debris, his powerful legs to scrape the earth into a deep, circular depression. Kaya, with her more agile forelimbs, arranged the softer mosses and ferns they gathered from the fringes of the lake, creating a soft, warm cradle. The process was slow, painstaking, driven by an ancient imperative. Then came the eggs. 6 of them, each the size of a man's torso, their shells a pale, mottled green, impossibly fragile, yet holding the promise of their entire lineage. Kaya laid them over the course of several days, her breaths heavy, her body exhausted but resolute. Ger stood vigil, a silent, colossal guardian, his golden eyes sweeping the desolate landscape beyond the cave entrance, daring any threat to approach. The incubation was an eternity of watchful waiting. Ger would bring Kaya fresh kills, nudging her gently to eat, ensuring her strength. He would lie across the cave entrance, his vast bulk a living shield, protecting the precious future. Ash storms raged outside, shaking the very mountains. But within the cave, a fragile hope flickered. And then one day, a sound. Not the wind nor the shifting rock, but a faint, insistent GP, muffled by the thick shell. Kaya stirred, her head lifting, her scarred eye fixed on the nest. Ger moved closer, his breath held in his chest. A hairline crack appeared on the largest egg. Then another, spreading like a spiderweb. A tiny scaled snout pushed through, then a glistening wet eye. Within moments, the first hatchling struggled free, a miniature replica of its colossal parents, no bigger than Sker's hand, but perfectly formed, fiercely alive. It was a squalling bundle of pure, unadulterated will. Then another and another. 5 of the 6 eggs hatched, 5 tiny, vulnerable bundles of hope, chirping and peeping, their minuscule claws scrambling against the moss. Sker nudged one with his snout, a touch so incredibly gentle, it belied his immense power. He lowered his head, a soft rumbling sound in his throat, a sound he had never made before, a sound of profound relief and a dawning, terrifying joy. The world outside was still broken, scarred, a testament to apocalypse. But in this hidden pocket, in this warm, dark cave, life persisted. A new lineage forged in ash and resilience had begun. Sker, the solitary survivor, was no longer alone. He was a father, a mate, a patriarch. And as his children, the last of their kind, chirped around his colossal feet, he knew, with a certainty deeper than bone, that they would survive. They would adapt. They would endure. They were the future. They were the end of an age. The air in the sunken cradle hummed with a different resonance than the desolate winds that scoured the world above. Here, beneath the protective arch of the Twin Peaks, where geothermal vents warmed the earth, and ancient aquifers fed subterranean rivers, life flowed with an unceasing, vibrant pulse. Sunlight, filtered through a permanent mist that clung to the upper reaches of the chasm, bathed the lush flora in a diffuse, verdant glow, painting the broad leaves of giant ferns and the emerald mosses that carpeted the stones with an almost ethereal. Generations had bloomed and faded in this sanctuary, each cycle weaving new threads into the tapestry of survival. The echoes of the great roar, the primal scream of the world's sundering, had long since become a distant, almost mythical whisper, carried on the thermal currents. The first Sker, the one whose singular will had carved a path through fire and ash to find this hidden haven, was now a figure of legend, remembered through the inherited wisdom that coursed through every scaled vein, rather than through direct memory. His struggle, his terror, his improbable, stubborn refusal to yield, these were the bedrock upon which all that followed was built, though the world beyond the cradle had long forgotten the very concept of such an ordeal. Kale, for instance, bore only the faintest genetic memory of the desolation that had once been the global norm. His scales, a shimmering mosaic of deep jade and ochre, were smoother, more streamlined than those of his ancient forebear, honed by countless generations of agile pursuit through the cradle's dense undergrowth and swift currents. His eyes, large and intelligent, were a molten gold, exquisitely adapted to pierce the perpetual twilight of their domain, capable of discerning the slightest twitch of a burrowing creature beneath the moss, or the faintest ripple on the surface of the geoth. Unlike Sker, whose powerful hind limbs had once propelled him across shattered plains, Kale's limbs were slender, his claws sharper, designed not for crushing but for precision, for navigating the labyrinthine rock formations and scaling the vine-draped cliffs. His very breath was different. Where Sker had inhaled the acrid stench of a dying world, Kale drew in air rich with the scent of damp earth, exotic blossoms, and the musky aroma of their own kind. His metabolism, refined over millennia, was a marvel of efficiency, allowing him to thrive on a varied diet of mineral-rich tubers, iridescent fungi, and the swift, scaled fish that darted through the sunken river. The unique conditions of the cradle, the consistent warmth, the high humidity, the rich volcanic soil, had subtly molded his lineage, favoring traits that ensured their continued prosperity in this isolated bubble. Their very vocalizations, once guttural roars of challenge or triumph, had evolved into a complex repertoire of chirps, trills, and resonant hums, allowing for nuanced communication within their burgeoning communal clusters. The Sker kind, as the others were known, were not solitary hunters like their distant ancestor. Necessity and the bounty of their shared haven had forged them into a complex cooperative society. Matriarchs, often the largest and wisest females, guided the hunting parties, their broad-frilled crests, a trait that had developed over countless generations, serving both as a display and a heat regulator, rippling with subtle shifts of color to convey intent or warning. The younger males, still honing their hunting instincts, would range wider, charting new paths through the twisting caverns that perforated the cradle's lower levels, their sleek bodies moving with an almost liquid grace. The very young, their scales still soft and iridescent, were protected fiercely within communal nurseries, carved into the warmer, deepest parts of the rock, tended by several adults while their mothers hunted. Cale himself was part of a search-and-gather unit, a specialized group tasked with exploring the outer fringes of the cradle for new food sources or potential threats, though true threats were rare here. Their greatest challenge was often the cradle itself, its shifting rock faces and unpredictable geysers requiring constant vigilance. Today, Cale was tracking the scent of glowroot, a luminous, nutrient-dense tuber that grew in patches near the cooler, less explored edges of the valley. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, his long tail, now tapered and flexible, providing perfect counterbalance as he navigated a narrow, moss-slicked ledge overlooking a deep ravine. Below, the sunken river churned, its waters steaming gently as they passed over a series of thermal vents. His companion, Lyra, a female of his own generation, moved silently beside him. Her scales were a darker hue, better for camouflage in the deeper shadows. Lyra possessed an uncanny ability to sense changes in the Earth's vibrations, a crucial skill for avoiding sudden rockfalls or identifying seismic activity, however minor, from the world beyond. As Cale paused, testing the air with a quick, darting tongue, Lyra pressed her sensitive forelimb against the rock face, her golden eyes half-lidded in concentration. "The root is deeper," she hummed, her voice a low thrumming in Cale's chest. "Further, near the old falls." Cale nodded, a subtle tilt of his head crest. The old falls were remnants of a time when the water flow had been different, before a massive underground tremor had rerouted much of the cradle's water. It was a perilous route, but glowrootery was worth the risk, especially with the younglings growing. Their journey continued, a silent ballet of movement and instinct. They were not driven by fear of predators, for none existed within their secure world, large enough to threaten them. Instead, their vigilance was born of a primal respect for their environment, an ingrained understanding that even paradise demanded constant awareness. The skirkind had learned the rhythm of the cradle, the whisper of its vents, the rumble of its shifting stones, the pulse of its unique flora and fauna. They were not merely living within it. They were an extension of it, their lives inextricably woven into its very fabric. The forgotten nature of their survival was a profound aspect of their existence. The great roar had left a scar on the world, a deep, lasting wound. But time, the relentless healer, had begun to knit the surface over. Continents had drifted, mountains had eroded, and new forms of life, radically different from those that had preceded them, were beginning to tentatively reclaim the ravaged landscapes. In this nascent world, the struggles of a lone dinosaur and its enduring lineage were unknown, unrecorded. There were no fossilized trails, no ancient carvings, no whispers in the wind to tell of Skirr's defiant roar against the dying light. Their survival was a hidden current, a subterranean river of resilience flowing beneath the shifting sands of global memory. Yet, it was precisely this unseen, forgotten continuity that laid the foundational groundwork for all life that followed. The skirkind were a living archive of primal endurance, their genes carrying the blueprint of a resilience forged in the crucible of extinction. They were a testament to life's stubborn refusal to be extinguished, an unbroken chain stretching back to the very brink. Their unique adaptations to the sunken cradle, the enhanced metabolism, the acute senses, the communal social structures, the specialized physiology, were not just for physiology, were not just for survival, but represented a continuous thread of biological innovation. Their very existence maintained a complex ecological niche, influencing the chemistry of their specific environment, perpetuating unique microbial and plant life that would otherwise have vanished entirely. Imagine the grand tapestry of life on Earth. Most threads are visible, intertwining and changing through the ages. But there are also hidden threads, woven through the very foundation, providing unseen strength and continuity. The scare kind were such threads. Their survival meant that a certain strain of ancient intelligence, a particular set of highly evolved predatory and social instincts, did not utterly vanish. It meant that certain physiological adaptations, refined over millions of years, were preserved and further honed, ready, perhaps, to be drawn upon by life in some distant, unforeseeable future, even if only through the subtle influences of their niche. They were a living experiment, a proof of concept for adaptability. In a world scarred by catastrophe, where most ancient lineages crumbled to dust, the scare kind represented an alternative pathway, not extinction nor outward expansion, but deep hidden persistence. Their story was not shouted from the mountaintops, but whispered through the rustle of leaves in their sacred valley, in the careful thrum of their unique calls, in the vibrant pulse of their self-sustaining ecosystem. As Kale and Lyra finally arrived at the G-Glow root patch, its phosphorescent glow illuminating the dark cavern like scattered jewels, a young female, one of the tender adults, was already there, carefully extracting a tuber. Her back was to them, her sleek scales catching the faint light. She turned at their approach, her golden eyes reflecting the luminescence of the root. "The harvest is good," she hummed, her voice soft. The warmth from the new vent helps them grow larger. Kale surveyed the bounty, a deep sense of contentment settling within him. This was their existence, constant, harmonious, sustained. They were not conquering the world, nor even attempting to reclaim it. They were simply a being, thriving. And in their quiet persistence, they were writing the most important story of all, the story of enduring life, hidden from view, yet fundamentally shaping the future, one silent, thriving generation at a time. The world would never know of Skier or Kale or Lyra, or the countless generations between them. But the world existed because of them. Their forgotten survival was the soil from which new life, in its myriad unexpected forms, would eventually blossom. And that, in its silent profundity, was enough. The sunken cradle breathed around them, a living testament to resilience, its ancient heart beating steadily, quietly, beneath a world that had moved on, unaware of the profound debt it owed to the dinosaur that survived. Yasser, Zisti, whispers through time. The last tremor, a sigh from the dying world, had faded into the deep hum of geologic time. Ancient beyond its years, its scales scored by the abrasive dust of a planet, unmaking itself, rested on a shelf of cooling basalt. The sky above was a bruised canvas, still streaked with the ash of 1,000 incinerated dreams. But through a nascent rent in the perpetual twilight, a sliver of sun, weak and wan, pierced the gloom, painting the jagged peaks with the ghost of dawn. It was not the world Sker had known. The towering cycads, the lush ferns, the vibrant, booming symphony of the Cretaceous were gone, buried beneath an acrid shroud. Yet, life, tenacious and defiant, had found a way. Below, in a hollow scooped from the debris field, a cluster of resilient, pioneering mosses clung to moisture, their emerald defiance a tiny, verdant beak. And deeper still, within the insulated burrows its kind had tirelessly excavated, Sker knew there were others. Younger ones. Smaller ones. The E-Futury. Its own journey had been a monstrous odyssey of instinct and sheer, unyielding will. From the blinding flash that had vaporized the sky, through the suffocating darkness, the searing fires, the acid rains, and the gnawing hunger of a world stripped bare, Sker had persisted. It had learned to drink from subterranean pools warmed by the Earth's own hidden furnaces, to hunt the desperate, dwindling scavengers that clung to the fringes of the disaster zone, and most importantly, to dig, to burrow, to tunnel, to carve a labyrinthine sanctuary from the very bones of the planet, deep beneath the toxic surface. It had become a creature of the under-earth, its world redefined by darkness and rock, its senses sharpened to the subtle tremors of a grieving world. Now, as the faint light touched its leathery hide, Skur felt an unfamiliar quietude settle upon its massive frame. The ceaseless struggle that had defined its every waking moment had begun to ebb, replaced by a deep, primal satisfaction. The world was scarred, yes, irrevocably altered. But it was not dead. And neither, Skur knew, was the tenacious spirit of its kind. A final, weary exhalation escaped its nostrils, misting briefly in the cool, thin air. The future, boundless and unknowable, stretched before its lineage forged in fire and shadow. Millennia bled into eons. The bruised sky cleared, slowly, imperceptibly. Continents groaned and drifted, their coastlines reshaping, their mountains rising and falling like the slow, deliberate breaths of a sleeping titan. The very air changed, its composition subtly shifting. The oceans, once tumultuous and toxic, calmed, their depths once again teeming with new, strange life. Dust settled, layer upon layer, until the scars of the cataclysm were buried deep, entombed beneath the immense weight of time, forgotten by the burgeoning world above. What remained of Skur's journey, and the incredible, unlikely resilience of its lineage, was not found in grand monuments or decipherable texts. It was written in the silent, eloquent language of the earth itself, in the nuanced folds of rock, the whispers within ancient sediments, and the subtle, often overlooked adaptations of the creatures that would one day inherit the planet. Consider the great unconformity exposed in the vast rust-red canyons of the interior continent. Here, a sheer cliff face rose, a colossal ledger of deep time. Geologists, millennia hence, would marvel at the stark, irregular line separating two vastly different rock formations. The tumultuous, shattered strata of the immediate post-impact era below, and the calmer, more layered sediments within that chaotic lower band, embedded in the solidified ash and compressed rubble, lie anomalies that have puzzled generations of paleontologists. Not complete skeletons of large creatures. Those were rare, consumed by the initial conflagration, but trace fossils, enigmatic and persistent. There were the peculiar, tightly compacted series of cylindrical voids, running parallel to what was once an ancient soil horizon, now compressed to stone. These were not the wide, meandering burrows of the pre-cataclysmic behemoths, nor the smaller, more delicate tunnels of early mammals. These were narrow, intensely reinforced, and exceptionally deep, plummeting almost vertically into the bedrock, before branching into complex, insulated chambers. Some exhibited evidence of secondary excavation, perhaps for mineral extraction, or to tap into geothermal warmth. Their sheer number, their density in certain strata, and the unique, almost metallic sheen on their internal surfaces, formed by compacted, high-temperature minerals, hinted at a sustained generations-long occupation of the deep earth. These were the ghost tunnels of Skur's kind, their relentless pursuit of subterranean refuge etched into the planetary crust. Further up, within the anomalous strata of the recovery period, were layers of compressed volcanic ash intermingled with surprisingly robust, albeit microscopic, algal blooms and unique mineral deposits. These suggested hidden oases, deep underground, nurtured by primordial heat sources, and sustained by unique, chemosynthetic ecosystems. These were the self-sustaining pockets of life that Skur and its descendants had discovered, nurtured, and thrived within, their very existence defying the barren wasteland above. The mineral composition itself, with unusual concentrations of rare earths and sulfates, hinted at a desperate, ingenious chemistry of survival, a metabolic alchemy born of extreme deprivation. No large body fossils would ever be found in these layers, the creatures having retreated to the deepest, most inaccessible recesses. Their physical forms adapted to subterranean living, their remains too delicate or too altered by the extreme conditions to fossilize and end. But the evidence of their presence, their extraordinary adaptations, was irrefutable. And then, there were the creatures themselves, countless eons later, bearing witness in their very biology. Consider the subterranean prowler, a denizen of the vast interlocking cave systems that laced the planet's crust. It was not, to the uninitiated eye, a dinosaur. It was a sleek, low-slung reptilian mammaloid, its scales the color of cooled lava, its eyes like twin embers, adapted for the perpetual twilight of the deep. Its lineage was so diverged, so alien from the great reptiles of old, that any direct connection to Skur would be dismissed as preposterous. Yet, look closer. The prowler's skeletal structure, while superficially mammalian, retained subtle reptilian influences in its pelvic girdle, and the peculiar, almost prehensile nature of its hind limbs perfectly suited for bracing against rock faces and propelling itself through tight squeeze. Its metabolic rate was extraordinarily slow, allowing it to subsist on the scant resources found in its abyssal domain. Chemosynthetic bacteria, blind cave fish, and the occasional mineral-rich deposit. This was a direct echo of Skur's brutal lesson in metabolic efficiency, learned in a world where every calorie was a triumph. Its sensory organs were a marvel. Whiskers of hardened keratin extended from its muzzle, sensitive to minute shifts in air pressure and seismic vibrations. Its inner ear, encased in a remarkably dense bone structure, allowed it to interpret the subtle groans and hums of the Earth's crust, distinguishing between a collapsing tunnel and a distant viable water source. Its skin was not merely tough. It was infused with an array of specialized pores, allowing it to extract moisture from the very rock walls it pressed against, and to excrete excess minerals with astonishing efficiency. These were not random evolutionary branches. These were the direct legacy of an ancestor who had to perceive the hidden world, who had to survive on almost nothing, who had to navigate and adapt to a planet that had become an airless tomb. The prowler's instinct to seek out deep, sheltered places, to navigate vast, lightless labyrinths with unerring accuracy, to remain utterly still for days, even weeks, when resources were scarce. These were behaviors etched into its very genetic code. They were the silent, enduring memories of a time when the surface was death, and the only hope lay in the cool, embracing darkness of the Earth's interior. Its very existence was a living testament to the unprecedented survival strategies of Skur and its ilk. Passed down through countless generations, refined and specialized into an almost preternatural connection with the planet's subterranean heart. The Earth breathes, ceaselessly writing and rewriting its own saga. And within that immense palimpsest narrative, obscured by the dust of ages, lie the faint, indelible ink strokes of stories like Skur's. The name, the specific struggles, the desperate ingenuity. These details are lost to the mists of deep time, unrecorded in any human history, unknown even to the creatures whose very existence is a byproduct of that ancient, forgotten triumph. But the story lives on. It is in the mineral deposits, hinting at the desperate chemistry of survival. It is in the unique burrow structures, silent monuments to a lineage that defied global annihilation by retreating